What is going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our round 2 live stream for the WM Phoenix Open. Going to get you ready for all of your exposure on Friday with a look at the weather report, some DFS strategy, ownership, shots gained metrics, building a player pool for tomorrow. We'll go through any questions or player pool deep dives that you have on that side. And then afterwards, going to turn our focus to the prop and the betting boards and trying to find some value from that perspective. And that'll include, of course, conditions, pin locations. We're going to go through all of those together. And also what we're looking at for prize picks and underdog and a little bit of a slip that we can tail there together. But hopefully everyone's having a fantastic week. It was a lot of fun watching the golf in the desert, and only going to get better as the weekend festivities start. And there's one thing I know about this event is that Friday and then Saturday especially are absolutely wild at the Wasted Management Open, as some would call it. So thoroughly looking forward to that. Some of the people watching, I've got to get out there in person one of these years to do it in my in person myself. But yeah, looking forward to everything. And we see we got Jose in the chat. You could put a little $50 wager on Goddard winning. Yeah, I got a $50 wager on him to win with and without Scotty. So yeah, I would resist the temptation. You said it's like the Green Goblin mask speaking to you. Don't click that cash out button. Let's ride it out at least a couple more days. You got Retail Ripper, who was just a birdie away from taking down the drive the green. Good stuff, man. That's a heck of a way to start the week. I'm sure profitable for you from that perspective. A few questions, which we'll get to a little bit later on. Pin locations are on the docket, so you'll definitely have that covered. A few other questions that we'll go through as well, and some weather stuff that we'll deep dive. What's going on, Illini fan? Long time no see, and I agree with you, DK. It's extremely annoying when they don't finish play in time, especially because they condensed the field this time around, and you would have thought that they would finish on time if they made it a smaller field, but still not the case. They're pretty slow out there. What's going on? Go Collect. Welcome on in. And yeah, I'm not going to skip over any of your questions. We'll get to that a little bit later on. Let's go ahead and hop on into this thing. But first things first, we're going to take a look at conditions from today and what we can learn from round number 2. And first thing I want to touch on would be the quote unquote weather edge that we had for this week. And it did not work out like we were hoping to. And sometimes the weathermen get stuff wrong. And that's exactly what happened today. There was next to no wind for the first 3, maybe even 4.5 hours of play. And for the first 2.5 hours, the golf course was playing -2.5, which is just batshit low. That's what happens when there's no wind around this track. But as soon as the wind kicked up, about 10:30 local time, maybe 11 local time was when it truly started kicking out there. Scoring average went from -2 in the morning to just -0.46. So you can see just how quickly the conditions turned on their head. And then in the afternoon, it was about the same kind of conditions the entire time. They were calling for it to get a little bit later with the winds in the afternoon, and that just didn't end up happening. And that's just sometimes going to be the case when you're playing a weather edge. You've got to live by the positive when it goes your direction. You have to deal with the negative when it doesn't work it out. I'll say, though, been doing this for 6, almost 7 years professionally at this point. It works out a lot more for you than it works against you. And, you know, the psychology of being a human is that you remember a lot of the times that it doesn't work out more than the times that it does work out for you. So don't overreact. If you were somebody that played that weather edge for main slate, it's going to stink. You're probably not going to have a chance to take down that much this week, at least if you went all in on that edge. But that's also why I only stacked 15% of my lineups this week. It's only going to be a small edge because it's one of the 4 rounds to begin with. So not the exact kind of start that I was hoping for my main slate DFS exposure, but also not the end of the world. But in terms of what we can take from this to round number 2, because that's the important part here. It doesn't matter whether it went our way or not. We can't change that after the fact, right? So we're not going to dwell on that or anything. But because the weather was just so far off what they were forecasting, I don't think we can learn that much, because when we take a look at the forecast for round 2, it looks very consistent from the morning to the afternoon wave. So for the first 3 hours, there's not much wind at all, but about the same time that it kicked up today, the winds kick up to closer to 10 miles an hour, and that stays consistent for most of the afternoon wave. However, towards the very end, it also dies down a little bit. So if I had to guess, tomorrow it's going to play pretty flat from the morning to the afternoon. If I was a betting man and I had to choose one side, that first 3-hour pocket of tee times being a little bit calmer might be worth attacking. But if you were going to do that, you'd really want to prioritize the first couple groups going off tomorrow morning, because the later starters are going to get caught by some of that wind towards the end. So I think if there is a quote unquote edge for tomorrow, I personally don't see a big one to lean into. It would be to go after some of those super early guys, or some of the very late starters that'll be finishing their round when that wind tapers off, because we'll take a look at the NEM forecast. That's also worth looking at for tomorrow. They've got a little bit more wind in the morning wave. So that's why I'm not as bullish on just going after this first 3 hours of tee times, because some of these other forecasts are giving us a little bit of a different story. And in this one, you could see where the very late tee times might also be getting that potential advantage. So I personally told my Patreon members that if you wanted to do anything with the wind for round 2, maybe go after super early guys or super late guys. But the vast majority of my exposure, in fact, I haven't built my lineups quite yet, but out of my set of 150, I might take 10 and stack them towards the very early or the very late starters. But the other 130 or so lineups are not going to be played with any sort of a weather bias. And it really takes a pretty big advantage to lead into it for Showdown. A half a stroke to a stroke is typically what we're looking for. And it's kind of a hard pill to swallow after what happened in round number 1, but we've got to stick behind this weather. It's something that's been a massive edge for us historically in PGA DFS. And I'm sure there'll be some people that are turned away and kind of disgusted by what they saw there, but that's what weather is. I mean, it's kind of infamous, right? If it's the first time you've been let down by the weather before, you probably haven't played very much PGA DFS. Weather forecasts in real life day to day are unreliable at best. And that's always going to be the case, even if we have all these high-tech models like we use here on this on the streams and whatnot. We just got to deal with that. But when it works out, when we get that quarter to even a stroke advantage in our favor, it could be massive for your long-term ROI. And maybe the next time that we get a weather advantage, it isn't played nearly as much. Not to say that a lot of people play weather edges to begin with. It is one of the underutilized ways to grind out ROI that we have in this industry. But I'd say after a day like today, especially one that was as publicized as that, we'll put it in quotes now, right? The edge for this week. Is when it's that widely publicized and it lets people down, they're not going to be as willing to get to it the next time around. And if you're having those sort of thoughts, I guess the only takeaway I'll give you from today is to push back on that as much as you possibly can. It's only a one slate outcome. These weathermen do their best to predict it as much as they possibly can. And we've got to deal with the forecasts and the tools that we're being given. So that's the weather for tomorrow. We're going to circle back on this with the prop section later on. But to go back to the HRRR, as that is the most reliable out of all these forecasts, at least typically the most reliable we have out of all of these forecasts, it looks very consistent to what we had for round number 1. And the scoring average between the two waves was only just a little bit under par. That is significantly harder than what we typically see at this course. And to kind of piggyback on something that we mentioned during yesterday's live stream, this golf course is a lot harder this year because of the longer rough aspect. You've got 4-inch rough as opposed to 2.5-inch rough that you've had in previous years. And that's going to make a big difference when you're missing fairways. So my intuition on going after some off the tee heavy players, that was kind of the adjustment that we made before yesterday's live stream, ended up being pretty correct. I mean, if you take a look at the top end finishers, like a Chris Goddard's, obviously a bomber, also pretty accurate. A lot of that top 5, top 10 are some of the best off the tee players that you have in the field. And it is only an 18-hole sample size, but we'll see how that trends over the next few days. At least if it ends up working out that way, it could be still a pretty good week for DFS, even though round number 1 didn't work out quite like I was hoping it would. Let's go through some ownership next. So after we have the weather edge, the biggest edge that you can get for Showdown would be from the ownership angle and playing against the rest of the field. And it's always important to know where the rest of the field is going with a lot of their lineups so that you can make adjustments for your own exposure. And it's not to say that just because somebody is a little bit popular and in this top 20 list that you have to completely fade them, but it does take away from their utility. If you're going to use somebody that's 20 to 25% owned and they end up being the optimal play, then that's 20 to 25% of the field that you're sharing that player with, as opposed to the other end of that spectrum, the other extreme, somebody that's only like 1% owned, they go off and they're a nutted performance and they're in your lineup, then next to nobody's going to have that same sort of a player. So that's why if we can avoid these kind of players where we can, it could be extremely advantageous. And the other thing about ownership is not just having the ability to move up on those leaderboards when your players hit, but also from the duplication chance. When you have a lot of these high-owned players in your lineup, your duplication percentage goes exponentially up across the board. So it's important to have at least 2 to even 3 pivots in all of your lineups to make sure you're getting enough differentiation to not duplicate yourself a million different times. But we're going to go through some player pool deep dives and questions a little bit later on. But I do want to catch up on the chat and say hi to some of you guys as you get into here. Also to get a sip of this Mexican Coke. What's going on, Victoria? What's going on, Illini fan? He said, hit that like button, everyone. I co-sign that if you guys haven't already. You missed the main slate, so here you are. You never play Showdown. I've got to say, man, Showdown's where it's at. I have a lot of fun with it. I feel like the in-tournament stats give it a little bit of extra flavor and a little bit of more depth with the research process. So, yeah, welcome on in. Let us know if there's any questions that you have about the process. And, yeah, I think you're going to learn a lot from this if you haven't played a lot of Showdown. Let's go through the ownership up top. And it's not going to be quite as polarized as when we get to Sunday, when the higher owned guys are high owned at the top end of the leaderboard, and the low owned guys, the guys that are just squeaking by, are super low owned. But you're starting to get that incorporated in round two. So, for example, your 18-hole leader, Chris Goddard, who was on our betting card this week, is 23% owned in large field contests. So if you're going to use him, you're not going to get as much differentiation compared to some of these other players. Matt McNeely also on the betting card this week. Pretty stoked about how those two played. They're carrying a lot of my exposure right now, but he's going to be 21.5% owned in large field GPPs. So I would say of these top 5 players that I'm fading, the vast majority of them, world number 1, more on that a little bit later on, but he is somebody that I'm planning on using. So these players, even though they might grade out well, like for example, Chris Goddard was one of the top 5 ball strikers in the field today, did gain over 3-stroke short game though. So that's a bit of a red flag on that perspective, but hit the ball extremely well. Because he's higher owned, it gives me second thoughts on using a lot of these players. And you'll notice that the top end of the ownership is dominated by 9 and 10K options, as it usually is on a Showdown slate like this. Also, Scotty Scheffler at $14,000. But when we go down to that 10 to 20 range, so we're going to skip by some of these other players. Matty Fitz, after his insane round of -6, I did not see that coming. His form had been kind of just like average lately, but he spiked off for a really good one today, that's for sure. Outside of that, though, you start to get some 7K guys that show up. Your Nikolai Højgaards at -5. Your Michael Thorbjornsons, your Sam Stevens at $7,600. It's something I'm going to point out about a Højgaard and a Stevens is that the reason why I've got them getting a little bit extra steam compared to some of the other 7K guys, a Thorbjornson as well, is that they had some of the better ball striking metrics of all of round number 1. It's although the ball striking is a really good way to get to sustainable skill sets from round to round, it's not the end all be all. And if somebody is getting an extra 5 to 10% ownership, then that's going to take away from how good of a play they are. And that's not to say that I'm fading all of those 3 players that I just mentioned. I will say that I am not playing all of them though in my lineups, but I'm playing at least 1, maybe even 2 of those 3 players in my lineups for tomorrow. But when I'm using somebody in that 7K range that's closer to 10 to 15% ownership, single entries, these guys could be closer to 15 to 20%, I think, because of that ball striking angle and the people doing their research and landing on the same kind of plays. And Højgaard and Stevens aren't just good in the ball striking. They were top 5 players in the category. So people that are going to any sort of database with the live shots gained metrics are going to be looking at those players first. So that's why I'm giving them a little bit of extra steam in my projections. And that's something that I've started to adjust over the last couple months is the research process for a lot of the people out there. And, I'm the biggest show for Showdown at this stage that we have in the industry. So, a lot of the things that I say here are going to have at least some sort of an impact on the ownership, but some of the other things that you hear around the industry as well are also going to have an impact on that. So I'm trying to encapsulate that a little bit better, get a pulse on the industry, and make sure that I'm accounting for that in some of these projections. Sam Burns, he's +1, but he's still towards the top end of the ownership. And I guess I point him out here just to show you guys that there are some players in the 9K plus range that are still getting ownership just because they're at the top end of the board. And I actually think that Sam Burns is a pretty decent play at this golf course, a really good course history, high birdie percentage player on the PGA Tour. But you're not getting that much of an ownership discount because of where he is on the pricing board. So it's really these 7K range players that I think you want to be careful with from that ball striking angle. And Max McGreevy too. Daniel Berger, elite tier course history, and played really good today. These are a few other players that I think people in their research processes are going to land on and potentially have a little bit higher ownership than you might expect. And I got to say, McGreevy's a damn good play. Stevens too. Højgaard's a damn good play for tomorrow. So I hate to say it, but they're going to be getting the extra ownership. And there's a good chance that a lot of those guys are still in my player pool anyway. So I can't play all of them. You've got to make some ownership decisions. And the ones that are just off of this list, I'll say, the ones that are closer to the 7.5 to 10% range in that 7K range, I'm fading a lot of the players that you're seeing down here. And I do have to black out the projections to keep some of it behind the paywall for my Patreon members. If you guys want to download the sheet with all my projections and you want to see who some of those players are, you can via the Golf DFS tier in the link in the description of the video. But as you go further down in the pricing, that ownership aspect means more and more, because those guys that are 10% owned in the 7K range, I've got 3 to 4%ers around them. The players that are close to 5 to 6% ownership in the 6K range, not a whole bunch of those on a slate like this, but there's going to be guys around them that are like 1% owned. In comparison, that 5 to a 6X difference, or maybe the 3 to a 4X difference that you have in the 7K range, is a lot bigger difference from player to player than what you have with these guys in the 9K. Like, for example, Sam Burns is a low-owned guy up top, and he's still 11.3%. Highest owned player on the slate is Chris Goddard, who's about twice the ownership, a little bit over twice the ownership of a Chris Goddard. So you can see how that difference really condenses as you go down the board. It's important to note that you should be looking at that on a percentage difference basis, not on a raw percentage difference basis, because the difference in ownership between a 2%er and a 0.5%er it's a lot better to visualize the differentiation in your lineups if you look at it from that perspective. But as I was saying before, if you guys want to get this spreadsheet with everything that I'm doing for Friday, you guys can find that on the Patreon. It's also worth noting that you should have a process for building your player pool, and that's exactly what we're going to go through here next. It's, we want to know where the rest of the field is going, but even despite that, we've still got to pick some of those players to use, and you want to be very intentional about who you're using for round 2. Hell, not even just round 2 showdown, round 3 and 4, but for your main slate lineups, you should be very intentional about the kind of players that you're using. And this is a good way to show you what that looks like from a professional player like myself. So you've got the shots gained categories at the top. That would be your ball striking and short game regression. Ball strikings are off the tee and approach play together. Your short game regression are guys that really struggled around the green and putting. Those are the categories that are a little bit more volatile from round to round. So you can see a little bit of a bounce back there. That's why I'm looking for those sort of players. The ball striking is more consistent, so that's why we lean into that. But then also we have things that aren't even tied to the round 1 performance whatsoever, like what we have in these bottom 3. And it's important to have that kind of a process, because golf is such a volatile sport. Golf, and the reason why game theory is so important for golf is that it's so hard to predict on just an 18-hole sample size. Hell, it's hard to predict over a season. It's even harder to predict over an event, and then exponentially on top of that as you get to just a 1-round sample size like we have here for Showdown. So thinking that you're going to get the absolute nuts from what happened the day before and all the noise that we have in golf is ludicrous. It's just not going to happen every single time. Will there be bits and pieces that you can pick out from what happened the day before? For sure. And that's why we have the shots gained categories on there. But we have 3 out of the 5. So the vast majority of our player pool for tomorrow that are not coming from those shots gained metrics. They're coming from high upside players, people that make a whole lot of birdies. This golf course can be taken low. We saw the -6 or better rounds from a few players. Chris Goddard, -8 birdie bogey-free rounds. You want guys that actually have the horsepower to make those kind of birdies. You want course history. This is a course with extremely sticky course history from year to year. That's something that you could really use to build your player pool on as well. Also, overseed putters. That's something that's utilized a little bit less than some of the other categories in my exposure for tomorrow. But overseed is the type of grass that these guys are putting on. And if you want to make that one of the ways that you're using to build your player pool, then I think that makes a whole lot of sense. But whether you're using these categories or not, I think you should have a rhyme and reason for all the guys that you're clicking into lineups. You can build on top of this. You can make it 6 or 7 different things that you're using to build on. You can condense it. Maybe you only play like 5 lineups, right? And you don't need like 5 or 6 different reasons to build your player pool. Maybe you condense it down to 2 or 3 reasons that you really like and make that your narrative for round number 2. Just don't pick names out of a hat. We've got, let me count how many players. 122 players after Miliano Gonzalez ended up withdrawing today to choose from. You can only choose 6 of them in each lineup. My player pool, I think, was like 30 players, maybe like 28 to 30 players for tomorrow. You don't need to be picking names out of a hat to even pick 28 players out of a set of 122. If you're just building a couple lineups and your player pool is like 6 to maybe 10 players, then you sure as shit should not be picking names out of a hat. So we'll show you what this top 2 kind of looks like. We're going to go through the shots gained metrics together and do some of those deep dives that you guys have for me in the chat. The high upside, I'll show you guys where you can find some of that on there. But these bottom 2 categories are things that you can find directly on this Patreon sheet. So if you join over there, you guys can get all of this research stuff for yourself. You got the shots gained putting overseed, which is in this right category over here. And the way to read this, by the way, for anyone that's maybe newer to my content, is that you've got the shots gained putting overseed in this first category. And then to the right, it says shots gained putting differential. And what that means is it takes this number and compares it to their 24-round putting baseline and says, are they better on this type of grass that they're playing on this week, or are they worse over their last 24-round baseline? And for example, a Pearson Cootie, he only gains about 0.29 shots gained putting per round on overseed, which doesn't seem that great. It's still above average, right? It's still pretty solid. But when you compare that to his 24-round baseline of losing, I guess it's 0.31 shots per round that he's losing over that sample size, it's a 0.6 shot difference. And it's extremely favorable from that department. And, like a Sam Stevens, for example, maybe that's why he had so much success in round number one, or at least part of the reason why he found that success is that he's a slight gainer on that overseeded surface. But look at this, even though it doesn't stand out that much, it's a half a stroke better than what he's been doing for the last 24 rounds. So you can find some of that on there. The course history, you can find on the event history tab at the bottom. Scotty Scheffler, a legit course history guy, somebody that I'm using for bounce back in lineups. And you'll notice if we go back to the ownership tab from before, I only have him at like 18%. He's down there at like number 5 in the ownership, so distinctly lower than what he was for main slate. It's a cost prohibitive kind of play to get to for Showdown, but because of the chaos and the variance of an 18-hole sample size of golf, the guys in the 6K range, and I was going to scroll down because normally the 6K range guys are at the bottom of my spreadsheet, but it's sorted by ownership here, so it's not quite like that right now. But if you go to the bottom end of the pricing, you're going to find a lot of guys tomorrow that go off from there that are optimal plays just because it's a more chaotic sample size. Like by the end of the week, the guys that are in the 6K range, maybe they have one good round, but they're probably going to have at least one or two stinkers, and they're going to finish at best towards the middle in most cases. But from just, a single showdown slate like what we have for tomorrow, they could easily get there and be the nuts with somebody like a Scotty. So I wanted to play him out in his course history, but we do have an entire tab for that. You can see like Cam Young has been pretty solid with the course history. Matt McNeely has the 2 top 10 finishes in a row at this golf course. Just another data point that you can use to your advantage over there. Now let's go through some shots gained metrics and then any player pool deep dives that you guys have for me in the chat. And then we're going to build a lineup and go on to the prop and the betting side. But let's start off with a look at the ball striking stats, which is normally our go-to, at least to start our process for looking at the round one performance. And there's Nicolai Højgaard, like I was talking about before. We mentioned that he was probably going to be a little bit more popular because of these stats. He gained off the tee about 2 strokes per round, a little bit under 3 strokes on the approach play, and actually lost with the putter. So the -5 round was not like he was gaining way over his head with the putter, which makes it rather sustainable from performance to performance. I've also got a Sam Stevens up there. I mentioned him getting some extra steam. Neil Shipley in the 6K range, he probably won't get as much steam as some of the other guys around them, but a McGreevy, a Chris Goddard, and Akshay Bhatia were all players that, if it's 2 to 5% extra ownership, maybe it's 5 to 10% extra ownership in single entries. Just keep that in the back of your mind. But in terms of how players set up going from round to round, these guys have the best profiles that you could possibly imagine, especially the ones that weren't short game heavy. So of the guys up top, like the Stevens, Højgaards, McGreevy's, they all actually lost strokes or about a neutral on the greens. A Goddard up low gained over 3.7 strokes between the short game categories. So I'd expect him to come back down to earth a little bit in those 2 categories from day to day. I hope he doesn't. I hope he shoots another -8 for us so that he can get out to quite the lead after 36 holes. That'd be pretty sweet. But one would have to think that statistically that it's still about an average to an above average profile, probably like a 5 or a 6 out of 10. But it's not an 8 or 9 out of 10 just because of that little bit of a red flag there. But Zach B, don't know how to pronounce the last name yet, but he also had a good ball striking day and lost with the 2 short game categories. And Akshay Bhatia did the same exact thing. And these guys like Zach B, Akshay Bhatia, Matt McNeely, maybe not so much with a McNeely, but like a Kiefer are going to be a little bit more overlooked than some of those players at the top. So if you're looking to get to these ball striking poppers that I was mentioning before, the guys up top can still be used. They just may not give you as much utility as what you're hoping for from the leverage standpoint. But some of these players are also really good plays, and they won't get that extra kind of a bump. So you're going to see me on a lot of these plays in general, but I think my favorite ones are these middle tier ball strikers. You could still give a lot of credit to guys like a Matt Fitzpatrick, but he also gained over 3 strokes in the short game. Erasmus Niergaard-Peterson, I hope he can keep it going too, but he gained over 1.5, a little bit over 1.3 strokes in the short game category. So it's not like that's unsustainable, but I would rather him be a little bit more ball striking heavy. Jake Knapp gained 2.2 strokes around the green. That could be looked at as a little bit of a red flag. but solid gains off the team at the approach play. So those are a few candidates to keep in mind for your lineups. But we also going to look at the short game. And I want to peek at some of the guys that gained a whole bunch with the putter first. And these are guys that maybe don't trend as well for round number 2 because it's hard to back up a really good performance on the greens. And whenever you do, you'll find yourself into contention or even win golf tournaments. But players like a John Perry that gained about 3.5 strokes putting, a Chandler Phillips, a Mac Meister, Rasmus Højgaard, etc., are players that I give a slight downtick to. And if they lost ball striking like a John Perry did, then this kind of shots gained profile doesn't make them 100% fade material. But if they're going to be getting any of extra ownership because of that -3 score, then there's somebody that I'm actively going to be staying away from. So a lot of these players I'm just not using in my lineups. Unfortunately, Chris Gotterup is towards the top end of that list, and that was that slight red flag. Also, the around the green play, chipping in isn't something that is that sustainable from day to day. So Matt Fitzpatrick was a huge beneficiary there. And Eric Van Rooyen, a Jake Knapp, Hideki Matsuyama gaining about 2 strokes to the field. Heck, even gaining over 1.5 strokes to the field is something that is going to be hard to reproduce for Friday's performance. However, if we take a look at the players that lost a whole bunch of these categories, it's not like that is a good thing. It just means that there's at least some hope for them to have a bounce back. And I think the prime example last week was actually for round 2 showdown. Sahith Theegala, round 1 lost like 4 strokes putting or something crazy like that. What did he do in round 2? He was the number 1 putter and gained 5 strokes in round 2. So it can be an 8-stroke or 9-stroke turnaround from day to day at times. Even if it's less extreme, even if some of these players are just around a neutral tomorrow, could be a market improvement from round to round. And some of these guys are going to be really tough to swallow. Brooks Koepka, big mistake that I made this week. Guy I thought, maybe changing that putter would help him. Nope, he was the worst putter that you had in the field. So it's pretty obvious that it didn't go his direction today. Now, could he turn it around tomorrow? For sure, especially because he was just about a neutral with the tee to green stats. Same thing with the Billy Horschel. He lost 3/4 of a stroke between the tee to green categories, but lost 3.4 with the putter. If he's about a neutral there and then plays a little bit better with the tee to green play, like Brooks, obviously, if he's going to be anywhere close to the optimal, he'd probably have to gain 2 to 3 strokes ball striking as opposed to being about a neutral like he was today. But these guys are going to be unowned in GPPs. I mean, nobody's going to use them. And if you were going to use them, I'm not saying that they're all great plays, right? Let's get to it. They're going to have an extremely low floor. Like at +4, if they start +2 through 5 holes, they're packing it in and they're not going to be there for the weekend. They're going to be in DGAF mode the rest of the weekend, right? Don't give a bleep if you guys have any little ones around. That isn't a problem for cash lineups. It's a problem for big single entries that you're playing in, contests where you actually care about the min cash. But large field GPPs, who cares? Like genuinely, who cares? If they're +2 through 5 holes, they're not going to be an optimal play anyways. The difference between them doing that and then shooting -2 and not being an optimal play is almost negligible in some of the large field GPPs. So that's where you would use these sort of guys. Like you wouldn't rely on them in your big $100 single entry or big $250 lineups for tomorrow, but like the $5 150 max, or even like the $25 150 max if you're just throwing in like 20 lineups there. Maybe you throw them in a lineup or 2 and you use that as your leverage piece off of some other pieces of chalk. So there's a time and a place for getting to these bounce back candidates. An Alejandro Tosti would fit that description. A Brian Harman too. Worth noting that Brian Harman's not usually that shitty of a putter, so we could really see that turn around for him. Some of these other guys in the 6K range maybe aren't as attractive, but like at Garrett Higo, I know +5 is super ugly. And also the ball striking was super ugly, but he's one of the highest birdie percentage players. So we have on tour lately, and he's normally a much, much better putter and even short game player than we've seen lately. So a few players to maybe keep an eye on from that perspective. Around the green too, you could look at that. Thomas Avant, I don't even know who this guy is. So don't worry about him. I wouldn't play him tomorrow. But like some of these other guys you could also look to for a bounce back. Maybe like a Rasmus Højgaard could be an around the green bounce back candidate. But he also gained 3 strokes putting. So that's kind of 2 trends that are going the opposite direction there. More than likely just neutralize both of it out. Let's go through any player pool deep dives that you guys have for me in the live chat now. So if there's any players that we haven't already gone through that you're curious about, feel free to go ahead and throw those in the chat. And we're going to go through some of these metrics here together. But what I'm going to do just before that is to go to this round props tab, and I want to show you where you can find some of the highest birdie percentage players. And this is something that you guys can find on Bet the Number. And by the way, if you guys want to try out Bet the Number, it's a perfect week for it. If you use code Gsluke when you're signing up, you'll get a free trial to use everything that you're seeing here. No cost involved with that if you guys cancel your subscription before the real one starts. But if you go down here, you change this to the last 36 rounds, you can get all the highest birdie percentage players lately. And what I had done a lot of last year was I looked at the 2025 list and did that. But now we're on to 2026. We're a whole 3 events into the year. Last 36 rounds is obviously still dipping into 2025. But if I'm going to dip into 2025, the reason why I'm doing it with this rather than the PGA Tour website and the 2025 stats is if I'm going to dip into 2025, I want it to be at the end of the year, the form from the fall swing or the end of the regular season that actually mattered, and actually what we have from 2026. And the other thing we wanted to avoid, right, is only using the 2026 stuff, like, for example, the PGA Tour website, because some guys have only played 1 event, some have only played 2 or even 0 events to start the year, and that's not going to give us an accurate measure of this actual field. So what we do instead is we change this to the last 36 rounds. Again, Bet the Number, link in the description, Gsluke to sign up, and you can try this out for free and take a look at all these players for yourself. But if you go over here and sort this by birdie average, you can see the top 5 birdie makers, top 10 actually, even 15 on the screen right in front of you. Scotty's number 1. Okay, no shit, Sherlock. Everyone probably could have guessed that one, right? But Garrett Higo at number 2. And he was also on that short game regression candidate list, perhaps. So him, a Patrick Rogers, a Harry Hall, Siwoo Kim, and Eric Cole all rate out very well in that category. And the guys that I really like as these high upside players are your 6 and 7K range options. Like Patrick Rogers is super cheap, and Eric Cole is going completely overlooked. Like even Matt McCarty, terrible round number 1. Few of my lineups are feeling that one after Thursday. But if you get to him as a bounce back, as one of these high birdie percentage, extremely aggressive players on the PGA Tour, could be a lot of leverage to be had. And, you know, especially the guys that shot over par, like a McCarty, for example, he's got to go low to even make it to the weekend. And I mean, he's a hometown guy. He doesn't want to be sleeping at home watching this event that's just going on down the street. These guys are going to grind at it, and especially the ones that have friends and family watching, like a Matt McCarty is too. So highly recommend checking that out if you guys haven't already. Let me get a sip of this because my mouth's getting a little bit dry if you guys couldn't tell. And let's go over those player pool deep dives that we were mentioning. And we got a bunch of them, so we're going to be here for a minute. So you're looking at Matsuyama or McNeely. So I'm not sure what market you're considering that for, but I'll assume it's DFS because you had the DFS comment just before that. So I'd say Matsuyama is going to be slightly lower owned than McNeely because McNeely was number 2 in my ownership, but it's about a 5% difference from player to player. So that's not really a big factor in breaking down those two. You have to take a look at the stats. I'd say that's probably the bigger factor to look at on this. So McNeely, really good ball striking. In fact, all 4 categories were as solid as what we'd be hoping to see. What did Hideki do? Lost ball striking and they gained in the short game. Yeah, it's McNeely for me, man. Just more sustainable from day to day. Not to say that Hideki couldn't go out there and have a really good round, because I'm playing Hideki tomorrow. Just want to put that out there for the full transparency. I love the course history. The fact that he's won at TPC Scottsdale before, but based on what we saw today, I have to side towards McNeely on that one. Yeah, we'll do the pins when we get to the props and whatnot. I'm looking forward to that, actually. Pins at this course can have a massive difference from day to day. Is it how is the delay going to play out for DFS tee times? It's not going to change them at all. So because the last few groups out are actually the ones that have the latest tee times in the morning wave, what they do is they're just going to start the regular tee times at the normal time. And then as the first few groups are getting off onto the golf course, they're going to have those guys finish up on 17 and 18. So no difference to like delaying the start or anything like that. Good question. And luckily isn't going to change very much. Let's see. Do I see the morning wave having the same advantage? Probably not. I think it's going to be pretty flat based on the forecast, but the forecasts are fickle things, as we've already talked about, right? Can we deep dive some Corey Connors? Absolutely. So Coco did not have an impressive round. I believe he shot over par. Yeah, +1. Gained off the tee, lost on approach, and then lost somewhat the short game. He only made 1 birdie. So it makes me think that the putter was probably even worse than what we see here on paper. He probably made a couple par putts or that sort of thing to inflate the number a bit. Yeah, this is an okay stat profile. It's not to give it a 5 out of 10. Like I'd be pressed to say that it's good because he shot +1 and he was about a field average player in the ball striking stats. But if Corey Connors is going to struggle like this and have a slightly below average day, I'd rather it look like this than him like losing off the tee, losing on approach, and then gaining like a stroke and a half putting. If that were the case, I'd be like, big red flag. Corey Connors maybe not the best play for round 2, but as is, and say he sets up like averagely well, but because he didn't have the best round, he's lower owned than he is for main slate. So I think there's some opportunity if you want to take the buy low spot on that one. Let's see. What are my thoughts on Hoagie? Don't really have that many thoughts, but I'll look through the stats and then maybe formulate something for you. Not really a player that was catching my eye too much. And the reason for that is because he was super putting heavy. So he was at the bottom end of my process and in my projections for round 2. So not somebody that I was planning on playing. I will say, though, that he's somebody that's played a lot better golf in 2026. I think if you're using the long-term modeling on a Tom Hoagie, that's not really giving you the correct picture. And just to kind of lean into what I'm talking about there, you take a look at some of the recent results on tour, and it's just a 9-day difference than what you saw for a lot of 2025. So the made cut at the Farmers is actually a good thing for him. That's a golf course that didn't fit his game at all. He actually had the top 10 finish. Another made cut at the Sony Open. Look how sporadic it was before that. A lot of dark red that you can see towards the middle end of the season. Not the best shots gained profile, but kind of like a Coco, a little bit of a worse shots gained profile. But if you want to take the buy low spot, I don't think it's the worst possible play. Let's see. Neil Shipley, is he viable? He had a really good ball striking day, so I don't necessarily think that he's unviable at that kind of a spot. The only thing I'll mention, though, is that like him and a Zach B that had one of the better approach days of the day, the 6K range guys, you've got to take it with a bit of a grain of salt. If you're going to take this from round to round, I feel a lot more comfortable about a legit stud being able to do so. Would it completely like blow my mind if one of these guys have a good day? No, but yeah, he's viable, but only in GPPs, I'd say. I wouldn't do it in like your single entries, that kind of stuff. He said Brooks hit the ball decently, but putted like Morikawa. Feels like it. And I mean, he didn't really do anything well. It wasn't even just the putter. Like, he lost off the T2. He hit 35% of his fairways. He was also the shots gained dumbass on the golf course. And I feel like it's okay for me to say that because Brooks is one of my favorite guys out there. And, you know, I'm just giving him a hard time. But on 15, he was in the natural area and decided to go for the green in 2 for some boneheaded reason. So, yeah, maybe he deserved to have that kind of a round. Maybe he's trying to get out of town early to watch the Super Bowl. Unfortunate that I used him in so many lineups, though, myself. I wish he wouldn't make those kind of decisions, go for the green in 2 out of the desert area when I have my hard-earned money on him this week. Said, love to get the Patreon in there and support our brother. I appreciate that. Yeah, everyone shouting out the Patreon page and whatnot. He said, Mexican Coke is delicious. It's the only Coke I'll drink. If I'm going to have the empty, shitty calories, if I'm going to clog up the arteries, I'm going to do it with the stuff that actually tastes good, like you said, rather than the fully processed stuff, right? It's just, I think it's a no-brainer on that one. Let's see. If you don't like it, your lineup's going to tank. It's bad juju. I don't think I'd go that far, but I don't think it could hurt, right? Liking it maybe gets you a little bit of extra karma. Who's my favorite sleeper pick for tomorrow? I don't really love doing that roll tighter. It's not my thing. I know our old friend DGen75 used to always like doing that. I'll sleep on it. I'll think about it here over the next 10 or so minutes, and I'll get back to you because I don't just want to fire one from the hip. I don't really have one that immediately stands out right now. And Scotty coming out firing, I hope so. I'm using him in some lineups. I think the course history is viable enough for a bounce back. Shots gained metrics, just to kind of deep dive that on Scotty, horrendous. He gained only with the putter. That is the exact opposite shots gained profile that we hope to see. But that's also why I think he's going to be sub 20% owned in large field GPPs. So, yeah, I'm taking the plunge, man. It's world number 1. He looks invincible, right? So surely he can't do that 2 days in a row. If he does, then I get beat by it. It's all right. Can we deep dive Brooks? Yeah, I think we just did, so we should be good on that one, but he's just got to find that putter. God forbid if it's worse than today. I mean, it'd be pretty hard to be worse than losing 3.4 strokes. Can I forgive Sibu after today in a terrible ball striking day? Let's look at it. I luckily faded Sibu this week. He was the one fade up top where I was like holding my nutsack, just waiting to get kicked in the nuts because he had been playing like invincible golf over the last few months. But let's see. So yeah, I lost 3.5 on approach. Here's the reason why I'll say yes, I will forgive him, is look what he's done the last couple weeks. Like, we'd be remiss, right? Not to mention that he's been gaining over 2 strokes approach per round heading into this golf tournament. Could he turn it around? Absolutely. I'll forgive and forget on that. And I guess the key on that one, too, is with Siwoo Kim, is that he's a lot lower owned now because of that performance than what he was for main slate. So it's a decent buy low spot. And I'd say even, we had a few questions about buy low spots lately. He's my favorite out of all of them. And he is a stud. He's going to cost you a lot more and probably be a little bit higher owns. But I think he's the one out of those that actually has the best chance to get there. By the way, smash that like button if you guys haven't already. Let's pump up those numbers and get this out there to even more people. How did Perry hit the ball today, and can he repeat tomorrow? Yeah, let's look at it. You want to look at Ryan as well? I got you on those. Let's start with Perry. So Perry gained 3.4 with the putter and then lost ball striking. So this is like a 2.5 out of 10 stat profile. I hate to give too much shade on my guy Perry because he was one of my favorite DP World Tour guys from last year, but not the best stat profile. And then he wanted another DP World Tour guy, right? Chris Ryan, the long bomber, gained off the tee. Love the course fit, by the way. He fits a ball striking bomber fest like this extremely well, and then was about an average in the 2 short game categories. This is like a 6 out of 10 stat profile. And considering the course fit, I'd probably bump it up to even a 7. So yeah, I prefer Ryan over Perry, and it's just how they did it today. It would be the difference, especially because the ownership is similar on those 2 players. I would use that to default on that decision. Let's see. You're calling it Bo Show. Okay, so that's good to know on that last name. I'm terrible with them, so we're going to go with the announcers. They know a lot better than me on that one. What's going on, Antonio? Just joined. Have we talked about X? You think he could go low tomorrow? Let's take a look. Good old Xander Schauffele. So he gained off the tee, and then he was about a neutral, a little bit into the negative, and this voice crack there in the short game categories. Yeah, it's a decent bounce back kind of profile. He started off real cold. He started off, what was it, like +2 through his first 7 holes. Then he rebounded quite nicely down the stretch. I like that momentum that he garnered on the backside. It is the easier side of the golf course, so I guess it's not like completely unheard of for somebody to do that. But yeah, you could see a Xander bounce back. I could get behind that. The ownership will be lower too because he only shot even par as opposed to well under par like some of these other guys up there. Let's get to the right tab. My apologies. I'm all over the place on that one. Can we deep dive Thorbjorn Olesen and Sammy Valimaki? So thanks as always. I got you. Let's go through Olesen first. Good old Thorbjorn. So Thorbjorn lost off the tee, lost on approach, gained around the green, and lost the putter. This is like a 4 out of 10 profile. I was tempted to say like 3 out of 10, make it a little bit worse, but it's not that terrible. Like he lost 1.5 ball striking. It's not the best. He was about a neutral with the 2 short game categories. The Thunder Bear can run hot and cold. If he starts off tomorrow like -2 through 3 holes, then he'll probably be engaged. Unfortunately, though, the Thunder Bear can go the opposite direction real quickly too. So if you're going to use him, I'd probably do it in the large hill GPPs where you can take on that risk. And I said it before, you're +2 through 5 in the large hill GPP and you give up, it does not matter. That guy wasn't going to get there anyways, at least in most cases. So that's why I would do that one. And then the other one was who? Sammy Valimaki. I like Valimaki quite a bit just because his form, I think, is going underlooked. Obviously had that big win, but he's been solid outside of that too. Gained off the tee, gained on approach, actually gained in all 3 tee to green categories, and then lost a stroke putting. This is a 7 out of 10 stat profile, and he's in the 6K range. He's also not getting a whole bunch of ownership. I think a quality play for Showdown tomorrow, and somebody that I'll be using myself. He said he saw somebody mad at DraftKings for not refunding his laps with Spawn. Oh gosh. Yeah, dude, it's like the people with the prize picks lines of a guy getting hurt and then wanting a refund every single time. We're just soft as bettors these days. We're soft as DFS players, and it is what it is, I guess. A lot of people out there expecting that stuff. Let's see. Let's deep dive Joel Damon and Ryan. So we got you on Ryan. Let's look through Damon, though. Damon had an up and down day, I believe. He gained off the tee, lost on approach. Gained around the green, mostly because of his chip in at 16, and then lost 2.2 putting. You could say that this is a decent short game regression candidate because of the negative 2.2 strokes putting, especially because he was able to gain, what was it, about 0.7 strokes with the ball striking today? Yeah, I'll give him a 6 out of 10, maybe a 6.5 out of 10. Nothing too crazy, though, because you'd rather see him gaining on approach for sure. You said you never want to hear about the weather again. You got absolutely shellacked. Hey, I've already mentioned it earlier in the stream, but if that's your take, you can totally do that. It's just that's probably the most slappy take I think I've ever heard. The weathermen get stuff wrong sometimes, and it's going to help you out when you play it sometimes, and sometimes it's going to work against you. If you're changing your strategy based on what happened today, then yeah, you're as big of a slappy as they get. So again, I say that with love. I don't say that to be like, condescending or anything. I mean it to give you legit advice. Like, just kind of nut up and know that that's going to happen. Like, it's not always going to be a half a stroke to a 1 stroke advantage in your direction. Sometimes they're going to get the weather wrong, and we've got to deal with that. That's just the thing. And so will I stop talking about the weather ever again? Absolutely fucking not. You can kick rocks, bro. It's part of my process, has been for 6 years, and that is definitely not going to change. Scoring similar to yesterday. Overall, I think scoring will be a little bit easier, I would say, than round number 1, just because the winds are going to be more consistent. They were really gusty at times. So we'll talk about the conditions, though, especially when I go through pin locations, because that could have a big difference on it. He said W stream, Scotty at 5.5 birdies and Hideki at 4.5 is 2.7x on Prize Picks. Scotty 5.5 birdies feels a little aggressive, but I get what you're doing there. It's world number 1 and bounce back spot. And he said Hideki at 4.5. Yeah, I'll have to take a look at that board. They didn't have up the birdie board when I actually went live, so I have no idea what they have up. I'm going to have to do some comparisons to the other projections before I give you any feedback on that. Any idea on why Pick 6 won't release props? Probably just too close to lock. They'll get them out there at some point, I'd imagine. They're like a Kitayama for Showdown. Thoughts? Not really somebody I've deep dives too much, so I want to look at that here together. Why haven't I deep dived him? In fact, I think I need to add him to the player pool. 1 second. I'm bringing up the other tab to see whether I'm playing Kurt Kitayama or not, because based on these metrics, I should be playing Kurt Kitayama in my lineups, especially because I don't think he's going to be overly popular. Yeah, he's not in my lineups, but guess what? He's going to be now. I'm adding him as a yes on here on the live stream. Fantastic shots gained profile, and super glad that you asked the question about it. I'm not going to give you any shit if it goes wrong. It's my decision, of course, to go after that. You'll never see that from me. That's for damn sure. Maybe some of the viewers will do that, but you'll never see that from me. But 2.5 strokes gained ball striking is really good. He lost 1.4 putting, kind of on brand for him. He's an up and down putter, but when he has his spike days, he's near that first round leader conversation or the nutted performance of the day. So yeah, give me some Kurt Kitayama. And by the way, I saw it on the other tab when I was adding him down as a yes. I've got him at only 9.5%. So not getting a whole bunch of ownership. Is Finau another big fade tomorrow? Let's take a look at the stats. All comes down to the putter for me. Yeah, lost with the ball striking and then, gained with the putter and around the green. It's a fade profile, but I'm not going to call him like a 100% certain fade. That wouldn't be fair to Tony Finau here. Tony Finau has decent course history at this course. I believe a run-up finish like 3 years ago. He's from Scottsdale. He knows the agronomy. He's going to be fighting hard in front of all of his family. And he's only 2 or 3 shots off of the likely cut line, maybe 4 shots. If it goes to -2, he's somewhat live to still go out there and make the cut. So I wouldn't completely bury Tony Finau at this point, but the shots gained profile is terrible. It's dog shit. We'll call it what it is, right? Thoughts on Rasmus Diergaard Peterson? In general, I think an extremely talented kid. I'm going to be early on him as much as humanly possible. Played him last week. He was a value play for us. I played him this week too. I'm planning on using him as much as humanly possible. But because he is at T7, he was one of the better ball strikers at 2.5 shots gained into the positive. He's going to be a little bit popular as well. So I think for main slate, it was probably the better spot to get that exposure. But in Showdown, he's also a high birdie percentage guy. Was top 5 on the DP World Tour in making birdies per round. That's extremely valuable for Showdown as well. So yeah, those are my thoughts on him, man. I think he's a stud. He said, to keep needing a player at $6,400, what's my take on Kanaya? Kanaya played really well today. So I worry about the ownership. If you need somebody at $6,900, actually, well, he's only even par. He must have had a few bad holes in there, huh? To offset some of those 4 birdies that he posted. I don't know if he's my favorite play, man. I'll just say it, right? Like, he's a very average player for this field. He's not really like a high birdie percentage guy. Shots gained profile is like a 5 out of 10. However, if you have that inkling that Kanaya could go off tomorrow, nobody's going to be using him, throw him into a lineup or two. In fact, if he's that guy that you're landing on at $6,400, I think you should probably use Kanaya because no one else is going to be using him. Maybe you'll convince some other person from the live stream to follow you on that Kanaya train, but that could be your leverage lane for tomorrow. That could be your spot where you even have chalk at 2 or 3 other spots up top, like a Goddard. Maybe you really like a Goddard and you like the McGreevy's, the Hoygaards that are really standing out with the ball striking stats. Sam Stevens as well. That was in that top 5. Well, you can afford to use those kind of players if you have a Kanaya in your lineup. So I personally won't be getting there, but man, I hope it works out for you if you use them because that would be a really good play at low ownership. He said, you're a big fan of the flat lines on Prize Picks because the pushes honestly make golf multipliers work out. Yeah, they still kind of screw you out on the multipliers. They've adjusted that a little bit over the last year, but I get what you're saying. I do like the push equity, and especially for like overs at 4 birdies, I think it can make a lot of sense. He said he didn't mean to send that yet. Ignore it. You're good, bro, even if it is for later. He said whether it's just another fun variable in DFS, that's exactly right. That's just how it works. You said it's all love. You're just venting. Oh, good, man. I figured I wasn't going to block you or anything. I know you're a regular around here, so I figured as much for you. But yeah, I am not going to shy away from the weather stuff, bro. That's how it works in golf, right? So why would we do that craziness? Are you crazy to think that the rough is deep this year? Yes. We actually talked about that yesterday. You're not crazy to think that if you hit it, it's tough to punch out sometimes. We mentioned that right off the bat on yesterday's stream. So I got some insider information from a TPC Scottsdale caddy that the last time they cut the rough was January 29th. And since then, it's been growing. They don't plan on cutting it the rest of the weekend. So it was capped off, I think, at 2.5 inches the day before the event the last couple of years. That's a big difference. And even though the scoring was really good this morning, I don't know if that was indicative of what we're going to see when it's calm this weekend. Like, I still think it's going to be a little bit harder than what we had there before. He said, Big Dick Hovland, deep dive. Thanks for all the great content. Keep up the good work. I appreciate that, my dude. Let's look at him. So he gained off the tee on approach and then a little bit more significantly with the putter. It's a 6 out of 10 stat profile. You like to see him into the positive, but not really carrying himself in the 2 categories that matter the most. So we'll keep it pretty muted there at like the 6 out of 10 mark. Can we deep dive on JT Poston? Sure. Good course history guy, by the way, if that's your thing for this week. It is for me. Really terrible short game, but he did gain a little bit between the off the tee and on approach play. This is a quintessential short game regression candidate. In fact, if I don't have Poston in my player pool, he's getting added to the damn player pool right now because I like what you're doing there. And he was in my player pool. The reason why I had to double check that is I actually used him for the course history rather than that short game regression. But you could also mark him down as a short game regression candidate. I think they'd be pretty apt on that one. Have I talked about Knapp? You think that he's a legit good golfer and you feel like nobody's talking about him? Yeah, he needs his flowers. He's got the 59 on tour. He's been a lot more consistent. And I think what happened to him in the offseason and how he started this year is also rather impressive to have that kind of resiliency in the face of a lot of grieving that I'm sure he was going through. So yeah, nothing. I'm going to give you a pushback there. The pin locations are live. I was looking at a couple of them before we got on here. 16 is going to be a little bit tougher than it was the last couple of days. He said Davis Thompson's profile for 1 through 10. I got you. Good old Davis Thompson. Now, overlooked. You want an overlooked player? Davis Thompson's being overlooked. Let me put some respect on my guy's name here. So Davis, nothing flashy, right? But look at the shots gained, especially like this time of the year when he was like heavily into the dark green. 6, 9, 7 shots gained for the event. You know, his okay weeks, he's still into the positive more often than not. He's just a damn good golfer. And he gained ball striking today, lost in the short game. Speaking of, is he in my player pool? He's not. Now, what would be the reason for playing him? I guess ball striking, right? I don't know. Maybe I'll add him, maybe I won't, but I do think that that's a decent option, Alan. Live Tour Joaquin Neiman is at 70 strokes. Thoughts? I've got a lot of thoughts on the live board, actually. I haven't entered anything myself, so we're going to hold off on that for like 5-10 minutes so that it doesn't bump by the time that we get there. But yeah, if you're looking at the under at 70, I agree with you on that. And I've got a lot of extra thoughts on the live slate too. The pins are live. Yes, sir. Did I know that Thomas Dietrich left for live? I did. A few guys, Victor Perez did too. Benny Ann did too. I'm sure there's people in chat that are hearing that for the first time. Like, wait, what? I didn't know they left. And yeah, he's really good in the desert this week, apparently, because last year he obviously won this event, the Waste Management, and now he's towards the lead over there on the Live Tour this week. So good for him. In Batia Deep Dive, I got you. And then we're going to build a lineup here together, so stay tuned for that. He gained ball striking and then lost around the green. It was a neutral with the putter. He's in my poll for the ball striking stats. So, and he's one of those players that's in that like 5 to 10 range with the ball striking, as opposed to the top 5 and getting the extra ownership in DFS. So yeah, he's a 9 out of 10. He's one of my favorite plays, and I kind of want to cut it off there because I don't want to steam him up too much or anything like that. Let's build a lineup so we can tie together DFS and then go over to the prop and betting side, like I was mentioning, and try and find some value to attack for tomorrow. But in terms of building a lineup, it's just making sure that we have enough differentiation in our builds and enough leverage to not duplicate ourselves. So let's start with a lineup that starts with Scotty, just to show you the difference in lineup construction. And just like main slate, because he's over 14 grand, it forces you onto the bottom end of the board, which can be looked at as a positive. You've got a lot of low-owned players at that portion of the board. And I'd say even more than main slate, because it's only an 18-hole sample size of golf. Another thing to mention on this too is that we also have softer pricing, but because it's an 18-hole sample size, the guys at the bottom end of the board are going to have a much better chance to get to the optimal, or at least they have more of a fighting chance to just do it for 18 holes. And now that guys are on average like $200 to $300 cheaper in the 6 and the 7K range, you're going to have a lot of usable players here. So for example, like an Akshay Bhatia, who we just mentioned, is $7,200. Like they can throw him into this sort of a lineup. He's going to be close to 7 to 10% owned. So in Scotty Scheffler lineups, he might be closer to 15 to 20%, but still compared to some of the 15 to 20%ers up top, that's not that terrible. So let's use him there. Let's go with a Max McGreevy too. Same thing as a Bhatia. He was one of the top end ball strikers. So he'll be 10 to 20% owned in lineups with a Scotty Scheffler. So maybe we don't have a whole bunch of leverage with these top 3 players, but we can still get that with our last 3. Let's use them. Let's throw in, I was going to use Thompson, but I guess he's not in my player pool, so that wouldn't be right to do right now. Let's throw in a Kiefer, another really good ball striking popper. Maybe gets a little bit of ownership because he was in that top 10 of the list as well. However, now we've got 2 spots to really get our differentiation in here. And because this lineup's going to be for like the big large field 150 max kind of contest, I'm really going to force our hand. And if you were in a single entry, you could probably take whoever the hell you wanted to for your last 2 spots and be totally fine. And no matter what kind of single entry you're entering, not going to duplicate yourself. You're going to have enough leverage there as well in those kind of contests. But in the 150 maxes, we just got to make sure that we're not duplicating, because I already said it with like the Bhatia and McGreevy plays. These guys, even if they're only like 10% owned overall, in Scotty lineups, they're probably going to be like double that ownership, because you can see when you use Scotty, you're forced on to like 4 or 5 of these guys in your lineup. That's why they're going to be higher owned in this lineup construction. So let's make sure that we're trying to get a few guys in here that are sub 5%. So for example, if you think a Damon can bounce back, he's a hometown guy, really likes this event. He rode into the Firebirds or Thunderbirds, whatever it is, trying to get into this event. If you think he could bounce back at sub 5%, he could be one of those players for you. Also coming in with the really good form at the Farmers. And then at $6,700, as long as you're not playing the chalk of all chalk, which I don't think there's really any chalk at that number, but if there was, as long as you're avoiding that sort of a player at $6,700, you'd be totally fine in the large field 150 maxes. But if you really wanted to make sure you'd be okay, maybe you'll leave $100 or $200 on the table and do that too. Like, for example, Marco Penge, really good birdie maker. I'll throw him out there as a bonus play for tomorrow. Only $6,600 is nuts for the #1 player on the DP World Tour. You throw him in there at sub 5%, you leave that $100 on the table. You're not going to duplicate yourself, and you're going to have 6 quality plays in your lineup. So that's the lineup construction, and one with Scotty Scheffler. Without Scotty, I think you have to think a little bit more. You're not forced on to that 6 and 7K range where the average ownership is a lot lower. And for example, let me actually bring up my player pool, so I'm making sure I'm clicking in mostly guys that I have in my player pool for tomorrow. Let's use a Cam Young and a McNeely. McNeely, we saw the ball striking stats from before. He's also a good course history guy. Cam Young's a good overseed putter. So I'm going for a little bit of a bounce back there. He did have a slightly above average round, though. It's crazy that we'd even call that a bounce back, but that's how good Cam Young's been playing over the last 6 months. Their expectations are a lot higher for him. But these 2 players, 15 to 20% owned, not really getting that much differentiation on either option. We don't necessarily have to get it with our next man in either, but we can, especially if we want to make sure that we have a little bit more flexibility down the line. So maybe rather than playing somebody like a Hovland, who's maybe closer to 15%, or a Rasmus or a Keith Mitchell, that'll be closer to 12 to 15%, that's where you go with a Matt McCarty at $8,200, a little bit more of a differentiated play at the middle end of the board, so that you can afford to take maybe one of those 7K range guys that really stands out, like a Højgaard. Like Højgaard, I love the shots gained metrics on and whatnot, but let's say that we use somebody in the 8K range that was chalkier, like a Hovland, like I said. Now we've got like 4 pieces of chalk in the same lineup, 4 guys over 10, maybe even 15% ownership in this kind of a lineup, or at least close to 15%. And now we've got to have 2 sub 5%ers in there just to make sure that we're not going to duplicate ourselves with other people. But then we're also having leverage issues. Like 4 of our guys are not even getting that much leverage on. Large field 150 max kind of contest. This is getting a little bit too chalky in my opinion. So that's why we make that kind of a pivot with a McCarty, so that you can afford to take a Højgaard. If you're okay making a pivot in the 7K range instead, maybe you can still play a Hovland up here, but players like a Højgaard maybe aren't the best example in that kind of a case. It's maybe a Kurt Kitayama is better to get to there instead. That still had the good ball striking stats, but was a little bit further down that list, so he wasn't standing out as much as some of the other players. Those are the kind of things that you should be thinking about when building your lineups. So to round this off, now we're at like $7,200. We still need some leverage in here, even with a Kurt Kitayama. So maybe rather than going to a Rasmus Nørgaard Peterson, that's going to be closer to 7 to 10%. You take a shot on, I know we mentioned Damon as one of the bounce back candidates before, but like a Wyndham Clark would make sense. He's a high birdie percentage guy, also from Scottsdale. So, he's still going to be locked in at that +2 score. And then at $7,000, just like in the other lineup, as long as you're not taking the chalk of all chalk as your last bid in, you're probably okay. But if you really want to make sure you're not going to duplicate yourself and add in some extra leverage, just leave a couple $100 on the table. And maybe Harman makes sense as your last man in that kind of a build where he was one of the short game regression candidates that was okay ball striking, but lost like 2.5 strokes with a putter. He's a little bit better on the greens tomorrow. Maybe shoot something like -3, -4, pays off that kind of a price tag. And also make sure that you don't duplicate yourself in that large 150 max contest. So that's tying it all together. Hopefully gives you guys some strategy for all of your Friday exposure. Best of luck in all those contests. I hope to see you guys at the top end of those GPPs. And let's take something down. It'd be nice to add to the bankroll heading into the weekend. And now let's go through the prop and the betting side of things. So if you're here for Prize Picks and Underdog, any matchups on the sports books, I was deep diving some of the 3 balls before we got on here. Now it's time to go through all of that. But let's go through some of these averages first. You can see the waste management at the top, and it played about even par. So the -0.13 under par scoring average, birdie average was 3.44 per round, bogey or worse 3.14, fairway 7.5, and greens were 11.25. Unfortunately, it did not go as well as I wanted to on my prop exposure today, at least for PGA. Went fantastic for Live Golf today, which luckily carried me into the positive from that perspective. But for the waste management, this is exactly how I thought the golf course would play. And again, a few of the fades I took did not end up coming through. So that is unfortunate, but the course read and what we were expecting for this week was about as spot on as it could have possibly been. So I'm thrilled about that. I don't think we have to make that many adjustments for round number 2. We are going to go through the pin locations though and see how easy or hard they are compared to the first day. That's really the only thing I think that's going to change drastically from round to round, because if we take a look at that forecast, they've got some wind towards midday, just like we had for round number 1, maybe a little bit less gusty. So I think if these are going to move in any direction, it might get a little easier, closer to like a half a stroke under par is maybe where I'd put the scoring average. But a 3.5 to 3.6 birdie average, bogey average going down to like maybe 3 per round is about as far as I would take it. You're not talking about big changes in any one of these categories. And, the fairway average maybe goes up to like 7.7 per round. Green and regulation average maybe goes up to like 11.5 per round. But that's what I'm expecting for round number 2. And I haven't had a chance to go through the Prize Picks or Underdog boards up as they weren't quite available by the time we went live. But we're going to do that here together and try and find some value for that. But before we do so, I'm going to point out these other different events that we can go through because there's some other props there that I think make sense too. So first off, the DP World Tour played about even par. They did not finish round 1, just like on the PGA side. So they're going to have some play to finish up in the morning, but it is not delaying the tee times. It played a little over par to par 72, and the birdie average was 3.42 per round. So unbelievably similar to what we had at the WM, except that it's a par 72 as opposed to a par 71 that we have at this course. And then at Live Rodaya, that would be the Live Golf event. This was actually the round 2 averages. My apologies. That's a typo on there. Round 1, it played about -2. Round 2, it played -2.11. So extremely consistent from day to day. It was actually slightly higher wind gust for today. So even with the higher wind gust, it actually played easier. So maybe a little bit surprising there. Birdie average in round 1 was 3.89 per round. Round 2, again, this is a typo on there, 4.16 per round. So relatively easy golf course. And it has to be also noted that on the Live Golf side, that there's a lot more outliers that we have on some of these other tours. And it won't be the case now that Live Golf has the cut line. It's going to take away some of those bad scores towards the bottom. But on this, thing like the waste management, there's not going to be as big of a discrepancy between the top and the bottom tier players. There are guys on Live Golf that are like way, way over par, like +5 to +10, that are completely throwing off these averages. So the better thing to look at on Live Golf, in my opinion, would be the median. And the average median score was well under 69 strokes. Over half the field shot -3 or better today at Live Rodaya. And the birdie or better median was closer to 5 per round at that golf course. So I just throw that out there, even though we mostly look at the averages here on this channel, just because Live Golf and how I handicap it over the years is a little bit different compared to some of these other websites and other events that we look at. Before we even look at the boards, though, I want to go through these pin locations because this could have a pretty drastic impact on what we're doing for our props. So I'm going to catch up with chat. I'm also going to bring up the shot tracker so that we can go hole by hole, see the changes from rounds 1 into round number 2. And I'm not expecting it to be harder or easier than the round 1 setup, but we could be surprised by it, right? If it ends up being easier, we can obviously adjust those averages that we just went through. And same thing if it's on the harder side. But let me get a sip of this Mexican Coke. Let's go through these pin locations, and then let's find some bets to go out there and actually place. So SH Kim, decent POA overseed putting. He's got okay form to start 2026. So I'm going to give him a 6 out of 10. Let's look at the shots gained, though. I guess we'll do that real quickly for you, right? Could never hurt. Let's see. Gained ball striking, lost with the putter. Let's give him a 7.5 out of 10. I think SH Kim is a pretty solid play for tomorrow and somebody I'm using. Benny Ann, yeah, he left. He's over there. Same thing with Victor Perez. Yeah, even you didn't know that, right? So I'm sure there's other people in chat that didn't know that either. Kind of random, but before he left for Live, did I like Uline? You're kind of gutted when he left. Nah, he was just a guy for me. Like, he's just like, I could compare him to Chris Kirk. Like, I like the dude. He seems like a good guy and whatnot, but nah, I wasn't gutted or anything. You wish Marco wouldn't have changed to the PXGs. Yeah, it doesn't look like it's doing him any favors so far, but hopefully he'll figure it out. I'm sure it's a comfortability thing, right? Like, you have the clubs that you like, that you know the feel on. Whenever he gets that dialed in, he'll be back to top 5ing and top 10ing like he's used to. Have I personally ever changed a putter? And do I think that's why Brooks was dead last in putting today? I don't think so. He was dead last beforehand. I think he's just trying to figure it out, doing anything. I've definitely changed putters before out of desperation. I'm more so of changing a putter grip kind of guy, though. But it worked out. I actually had someone on Twitter before the round say that he didn't think that the putter change was going to help Brooks out. By the way, that guy was completely right. So let's give him his flowers. I was wrong on that. However, what I said, the counter argument, and it still stands, right? The counter argument, I think, is still a very valid argument. Is I said, what about Rico Hoey? What about Lucas Glover? What about Ricky Fowler? Some of these guys that changed putter, then revolutionized their career. It can help, but it can also not work too. So I think it's a player by player thing. If it's the equipment that was the problem, it could be a good thing for him, but I don't think it was the putter. Or at least so far, it doesn't look like it, right? Only about 20% of the field saw more than 8 fairways. So about 50% of the field saw less than 8. A lot of below average guys are at 8 fairways. Ooh, we'll have to take a look at that. And you're right about Gotterup. He's not a very accurate driver. So if he's at 8, I could definitely get for the under on that. Which, by the way, he's at 8. That's like hard to believe almost. If so, yeah, I think you could be onto something there. We'll look at that here in just a few minutes after we go through the pin locations. That's going to be, of course, our number one go-to. Let's see. Thoughts on X at 68.5. The lines are even, and he started off shaky. Let's look at the pins first, and I'll get back to you on that one. Same thing on those ones. It could be a big deal. It might not be a big deal, but I do want to make sure we go through those. Smash the like button, as my guy Hoove said. Welcome on in, buddy. He said, went back to the old zebra mallet. Yeah, for now. I'm getting actually a haircut this week. So actually, no, you're talking about Brooks, huh? In the putter. I thought you were talking about my hair and the mullet that I have going on. You said mallets. Yeah, I've got a mullet going on right now, which I got to get rid of. Thoughts on Pot Guider? High upside player. You use him in Showdown, so I think tomorrow could be a place to use him. He's a bomber, so you can take on the par 5s and 2. Just do it in GPPs. He's got an extremely low floor. He's not playing the best golf, but he is a high upside player, as we saw with the win. He said Brooks would never do it, but if Brooks switched to the broomstick, he's winning 4 times a year. Yes, I agree with you on that. I think there's a lot of guys that should switch to it, but he's got too big of an ego to do that himself. He said, your main concern with Scotty tomorrow is that the dude was just pouting all day, just food for thought. Hey, yeah, if you want to make that your narrative for fading them, then by all means do so. He's done that in the past, though, before, then bounced back quite well. Even in major championships that he's won, he's had spouts where he's looked a little bit irritable. But I do have to I agree with you and give you some credence on that, because it was especially bad today. Like, he was, after the chip on 18, I don't know if you guys saw it, he left it short, then it came back to his feet. It looked like he had an aneurysm. It looked like he was legitimately having a bitch fit on the golf course. So if that's your narrative, I don't agree with it, but I'm not going to give you that much pushback. Like, I don't think that's the craziest thing I've ever seen. And no, as much as I love you, AWS, we're not going to your website. Let's go through these pins, though. So hole 1's on this front right side. These front pin locations, they're probably going to be a bit easier than this one that's like tucked on the very back left. But keep in mind that these greens are a bit firm. So I think in the morning wave that this hole number 1 is going to play significantly easier than today. But in the afternoon, if it were to play up to about the same difficulty, would not surprise me. And that's going to come down to just how firm and fast these greens are. They're going to get a little bit crunchier as the day goes on. Overall, though, scoring likely gets slightly easier at hole number 1. Let's go to 2 next. So 2's in the very back right corner. I would say a similar difficulty to today. maybe a little more difficult just because it's tucked over the bunker as opposed to wide open there on the left. But not much of a difference there at 2. So between 1 and 2, looks like a very similar setup so far. Let's go to 3 next. 3 is on the very front left corner. This is actually the second easiest pin location that you have at this hole. The only other easier one is in the very back left corner. It's on the lower shelf, which is the important part here. However, because it's in the very back portion of the green, when they play it for moving day, most likely, you're going to have more green to run the shot up close. Like you can even see Chris Goddard up here. He was hitting out of the rough on this hole. By the way, his shot in here where he almost made eagle was outrageous. It was from 240 yards out of the rough, but look how much it released. That's why this front pin location might be a little tricky because you're not going to have that much room to work with. But if you're laying up short and then you're coming at it with a wedge, keep in mind that the angle is going to be more like this because you're laying up rather close to the green, of course. You're going to have this backstop to hit it close to it. And if you are going for it in 2, it's on the low area. So when you're chipping to it, it's going to be a little bit easier to get it to land on that low area. So scoring should get a little bit easier there at 3. Let's go to 4 next. 4 is on the very middle left of the screen. I would say it's a little easier than today just because it's towards the fatter side of the screen, but little to no difference there. It's kind of like 1 and 2, 0.05 to maybe a 0.1 stroke difference on those. Wind direction could change it up a little bit more, I would say. Let's go to 5 next. 5 is in the middle right side of the screen complex. Middle length par 4. An easier pin location because it's no longer as protected by the bunker on the left. So that's maybe like a 0.1 shot difference there. Let's go to 6. 6 is going to be in the front left. This is a much, much easier pin location. And let's talk about this one. This hole today, I called it, by the way, on Twitter. I actually went out and put this in writing so that, nobody could refute this after the fact. This is normally like the 7th or 8th hardest hole. It's like middle of the road at this golf course. I said on Twitter, this will be the hardest hole today. And that's because it played directly into the wind, and this backlit pin location is diabolical. I mean, look how small it is, and it's got the firm and fast greens going on. So if you're playing into the wind and it's super firm back there, it was almost impossible to hold the screen. Like the only way to do it was to land it short like Goddard did, and then even then it almost released towards the back end of the screen complex. So an extremely hard pin back there, but now it's up here on this very front quadrant. So it's not going to be nearly as protected. A higher birdie rate, lower bogey rate, you name it, hole 6. That's like a 0.2 to 0.3 shot difference there. Maybe even bigger, actually, because they played like 0.2 over par. That might actually play like 0.2 under par the next day. 7's a harder pin, so this is going to be surprising to you guys, but 7's a harder pin. That's because the wind direction is going to, at least if it's the same, let's take a look at it. Not quite the same, but it's a similar wind direction to what we had today. The wind direction today was from the bottom right to the top left, so it helped to get closer towards that back left pin. Now that it's tucked on the right side, even though it's a slightly different pin wind direction, I believe the wind is coming off the right now, as opposed to like from the bottom right to the top left. So that's going to be tough to get towards the right side of that green complex there. Let's go to 8 next. 8 is a back pin location. Sorry, let's get to 8, not 7 again. 8's in the very back of the screen. A little bit harder than today, I would say. It's just a longer shot in. And it's a long hole to begin with. So I think 8's a hole that you're just trying to make par on and then move by. Probably going to be like a 30% bogey rate there. That'll be a tough one, I'd say. Maybe even the toughest hole in the golf course. 9's on the very left side of the screen. It's an easier pin than today. This false front isn't anything to fuck around with. You're going to see like people that chip it to their feet a whole bunch at 9 tomorrow. But it's a really wide portion of the green. So yeah, about the same scoring average, I would say. The only reason that I say about the same is you're going to see more birdies at this hole, but you're going to see more doubles because of people chipping it to their feet. So maybe those two things kind of offset each other. Let's go to 10 next. So 10 is on the very front left. So it's like over here. I would say it's a little bit of an easier pin. If this was a longer shot in like 150 to 200 yards, it'd be more difficult. But because you're hitting a wedge, if you hit the fairway, you're going to be able to hit it close to that front left pin location. Let's go to 11 next. So 11's a middle right pin. It's easier than today. Also, it's going to be playing slightly downwind like it was today, even with the slightly different wind direction. So scoring probably stays about the same, I'd say there. Yeah, honestly, the pin location is eerily similar. It's just closer towards that right edge, a little bit further away from the water, which is a good thing. However, now it's closer towards the right edge of the green, and it makes that right miss a little bit more in play than it was before. So that's why I think that one will be a little bit more neutral. Let's go to 12, very back right pin location. This is the hardest pin that you have at this hole. So this one will be harder than today. Let's go to 13, the easy par 5. 13 is in very front right corner, actually down in this low area. So that one should be pretty scoreable. The second easiest pin, I believe, that they use at 13 for the week. Let's go to 14 next. And if it's not the second easiest, it is the easiest that you have at that hole. 14's back left. This is another really tough one. And wow, I don't think they're taking it easy on these players. Like you had, what was it, 8 on the front side? That was that back pin location to the long par 4. And then now you have another one on the back side at 14 that fits that too. I don't know. It looks overall pretty similar, but it might be kind of tricky tomorrow. We'll have to see. The winds might not be as bad, but like the pin locations might neutralize it out a bit. This pin location is going to be a bit harder to make birdies on. There's a bit of a shelf in this green, as you can see, bisecting it right there, which means you have to be pretty precise to get it onto that back left shelf in 2 or even on 3 with a wedge. Let's go to 16 next. 16 is a very back left pin location. This is also trickier. Yeah, I think we see a trend, guys. Let's go to 17 next. 17 is a front left pin location. It brings the water into play. It is an easier chip, though, than what you had for today. So I think the scoring average will actually stay pretty similar at 17. But you are going to see more water balls now that it's on the left side of that green complex. And then finally, 18 is a front right pin. This one is easier than today, for sure easier. And you have that little false front action at 18. And this is where Scotty had the aneurysm. Looked like he was about to hit a little child or something. It was not good. He was not having a good time on the golf course when he did that. Today, though, it's on the front side of the green, not nearly as much slope to work with. So I think that overall, this pin setup is slightly harder than round number 1, but considering that the winds aren't going to be as gusty, is going to overtake that a bit. So to go to our averages, I'm going to put the projected scoring average at a quarter stroke under par. I was going to say 0.5 under par, but I'm adjusting that by a quarter stroke based on what we just went through. So yeah, around 0.25 under par, which means the birdie average probably goes up to 3.5 per round. Bogey or worse average maybe drops to like 3.05 or something like that. I don't think it's going to be anything over like a 0.1 to a 0.2 difference in either of those two categories. And then, yeah, the fairway and green averages, I don't think we have to adjust them much at all based on the pin locations that we saw, more so those top 2 categories. So with that in mind, now that we have an idea on conditions, let's see what the heck we can do for some value on here. So we're actually going to do some deep diving first before I go over any questions or deep dives, just as I want to kind of see where the board is before I give you guys some feedback for myself. Let's talk through that Goddard up under first. I mean, somebody pointed that out, and I think it's a really sharp play. Fairways, 7.56 for the average today. And let me actually bring up the PGA Tour website so I can show you guys the averages from last year and what he was referring to. So just one moment while I do that. Let's go to off the tee. Let's click on driving accuracy, and we're going to change this to 2025 so that we're looking at a proper sample size. I'm going to spell Goddard up right. We'd find it. Number 155 or 154 on tour in the category. So well below average there. And I know his driving today was excellent, but I could get behind that. Let's use that, and I'll give you guys that live golf prop that I was looking at before. So let's go back to live for just a second. We're going to do a lot more PGA, so stay tuned for that if you guys are here for the PGA stuff. But live golf, average today was 4.16. Birdies are better per round. The winds, let's talk through that now. The winds are going to be a little bit stronger tomorrow. And this is night golf. So we're not looking at like the daily forecast for Riyadh. We're looking, and I had to think about how to say that because it's one of those names that's not pronounced quite how it's spelled. When we go to the GFS model, they're playing tomorrow night when you're going to be in these like 15-mile-an-hour winds. I do think scoring is going to get a bit harder because of this, but there was wind out there today. And I actually watched the live golf, maybe one of the few people that actually did. And I could sit through watching that stuff. But I like the music, and I like some of the golfers over there. Like Bryson Brooks before he left was one of my favorite golfers. So I'm glad he's on PGA now. But there's a few other guys like Cam Smith, John Rahm that I just love and that I want to see every single time that they're possibly teeing it up. There was a good amount of wind out there. So though I do think it'll get a little bit harder than these averages that you're seeing on there, I don't think it's going to be drastically off. And I mentioned it when we went through the averages firstly too. These were the averages, not the medians. The median score was much better than -3. The birdie or better median was closer to 5. Birdies are better per round, which is why when we take a look at the board over here, and although it is priced higher, I don't necessarily think it should be. And this is going to be the slip that we're taking for at least the first slip here together. It's going to be an under on Chris Goddard up on the fairways, an over on Sebastian Munoz on the birdies. And here's the reason for the Munoz play. So let me actually bring up the Live Golf website so I can show you guys the reasoning for that. But if you take a look at the stats from last year on Live Golf, Munoz was one of the best players that you had on all of that tour, and that's not an exaggeration. Last season, he was number 3 on tour in birdie or better percentage. Number 1, a John Rahm. Could have guessed that, right? Number 2, a Joaquin Niemann. He won 5 fucking times last year. Enough said. Who was number 3 and ahead of Bryson, who won a bunch of times himself and had a really, really good year? Oh, Sebastian. And we can get him at 3.5 birdies? Are you kidding me? And the average was 4.16 per round. Sure, it might play a little bit harder, but the median average was closer to 5 per round. So maybe it's closer to a 4 this time. It just has to have like an average day. And on top of that, he's playing some of the best golf of anyone in the field. He's in the top 5 at this stage. I think an absolute no-brainer to mix in. So that with this Chris Goddard up in the under and fairways, if the average is 7.5 and he's number 150 something on tour in the category, give me that under with the push equity at that sort of number 2. So shout out to Damon in chat for giving us the information on that. I absolutely agree on that under Chris Goddard up. And so much so I wanted to jam it in pretty soon here with that Sebastian over. But just to give my 2 cents on Live, we're probably not going to add another play here on the live stream on Live, but I will for sure be getting more exposure myself to some of these. There are a lot of other values on here. And I'm not going to actually say them now because I know Prize Picks just loves ripping off the stuff before I can actually end up playing it myself. But that same idea that I just gave you guys with Munoz, you can extend to the rest of the board. And I would rather do it on birdies than strokes. I know we had a question about, like, I think it was Neiman for the under at 70 strokes. I like the birdie or better board a little bit more, just in case the wind is more of a factor than I think. You know, I am not a meteorologist, as I think we've well established here on this stream. But it could be a little worse than we think, right? And maybe the course conditions deteriorate more than we expect. Well, that's going to be more likely to impact the bogey average at this golf course than it is the birdie average. You're still going to have holes that play downwind, of course, if you're going to have it whipping a little bit more, which is why I think the birdie is probably the better category to go out of those two. So that's why we use the Sebastian Munoz in that category as opposed to his strokes line, where you sit there at 70 strokes just like a Neiman. And unfortunately, though, Neiman's at 4 birdies as opposed to 3.5, so you don't have that same luxury. But if the average was 4 birdies per round, an elite tier birdie maker shouldn't be at 4 birdies either, in my opinion. So there are some other guys on there that make sense, like a Joaquin Niemann that we were having on there before. Let's go through the Euro golf board. It played about even par. And I don't know why it's not loading. Maybe they took that off the board. Maybe my internet's lagging. It looks like we're good on my end. So I guess it's just Prize Picks that shin the bed over there. But let's refresh this, see if we can get Prize Picks to actually work for once. Yeah, I guess refreshing it probably did the trick. The Euro golf stuff, about an even par scoring average, it was a par 72. I think if anything, there'd be fade value based on what we have on here. Like some of your lower tier players, guys that have been kind of sketchy with their form, you could take for an over on strokes. At some of these guys at 70, like a Camp Pio is kind of one that stands out to me. He's somebody that over his last 50 rounds is actually losing strokes on the DP World Tour. If the average is closer to 72, then he's got to shoot -3 to go under a 69. That's a pretty big ask for somebody like a Camp Pio. So I haven't entered that one yet myself, but I was kind of looking at some fades over there on the DP World Tour side. Well, let's catch up on some PGA stuff. So for strokes, we got a bunch of 69.5s. It's a more positive board than what they had for round one, which I slightly agree with. I told you, I think the scoring average goes to like a quarter to maybe a half a stroke under par, but I don't think it's going to be nearly as positive as what Prize Picks seems to be accounting for, especially with some of those back nine pin locations being a little bit trickier than today. I hate just like betting against golfers. It makes me feel like a hater, but sometimes it's just the prudent move to do on some of these slates. And to have everyone at 1.5 under par, especially some of your average players, just has to be a mistake because I'm not expecting it to be like a -1.5 scoring average. So let's keep going through these just so we can do our full due diligence on it. But what they have lines you can change on Spieth now. Well, it doesn't look like I can change it there, but I was hoping like maybe we could take them to shoot like 67.5 or lower and then get like a big payout. Looks like they haven't quite done that yet, but let's look at birdies too. Kind of curious what they're doing on this. I think it'll be about a 3.5, maybe like a 3.6 birdie average at best is what I'd say. I don't know. This seems awfully positive to me. Like Erasmus at 4.5 is a very aggressive projection. Even a Pearson, I know he's playing some really good golf, but to have him at the same projection as some of the studs feels like either the studs are too low or some of those guys are too high. There's really no in between on that one. Yeah, I feel like a hater, but I see a lot of fade value based on what I've seen on there so far. Let's look at bogeys are worse. It was about 3 per round today. Probably stays in that same kind of bucket. You've got Michael Kim on there again. Dude, that guy luck sacked his ass off today. I'm not going over that. I could see myself going back to that actually tomorrow. But if we could find an even worse bogey avoider, that might even make a little bit more sense. Like I know Wyndham Clark kind of stands out from that perspective. In fact, I'm going to look at that real quickly. Let's do that. Let's go to scoring. Let's do bogey avoidance. Let's get it to 2025 so we can look at the proper sample. Wyndham was number 126, a little bit worse than the average last year on tour. I was hoping that he'd be closer to like 130, 140, but like that would even be a slight line value, I'd say, at that kind of number. Let's look at Kurtz, and I'm going to look at, I guess, Minwoo. Minwoo had his struggles at times last year at bogey avoidance. Number 137. Who was the other one we wanted to look at? It was Thor Bjornsson and then Kitayama. Let's look at both of those. Wrong Thor. Number 24 there. And then Kitayama was number 70 on tour and bogey avoidance. So they chose some decent players in the category to post on the board. Out of all the ones that we've seen on here, though, the best probably is Wyndham. And what was Minwoo again? That one we didn't look at. He was number 137. He's also towards the bottom. Let's look at the shots gained on those two. Kind of curious how both of them hit it. Minwoo lost ball striking. That's, yeah, a bit of a red flag. Let's look at Wyndham. Wyndham was a little bit more balanced across the board. Yeah, if I was going to take one of those fades for bogeys or worse, it would probably be Minwoo Lee. And then to go to the fairway lines, because we had that value on Chris Gotterup that made sense. Maybe there's some other ones that are also mispriced. And like, just to show you why this doesn't make sense, a Gotterup number 154 on tour last year in driving accuracy should not be at the same projection as McNeely, who was a top 70 player on tour in the category, or a Decky, who's a little bit above average at hitting fairways, or a Sam Burns, who's also in that same department. So yeah, good call on that, Damon. And let's catch up on chat now before we figure out what the hell we're going to enter here together. And then we're going to go through some free balls that I thought were interesting too. These aren't all free balls that I've already entered on the right, but I do want to at least go through a few that kind of stuck out to me. And see, we had some other prop questions from before too, so I want to see if we can catch up on those. So yeah, you were looking at Scotty at 5.5 birds and Hideki at 4.5. Oh, I hate being a hater, man, but I think like the under might actually be the play on those just because of the kind of average and the pin locations that we're seeing. But yeah, world number one, maybe not the worst bet for that kind of a thing. Let's see. Let me know if there's any pick six stuff posted. I know you were hoping to see that before, but they didn't have it up. Yeah, the fairway board might be a little bit high on some of those guys. I definitely seem to agree with you on that one. Let's see, I'm looking for some of these questions. A lot of the player pool deep dives there. Am I looking at Joel for the under at 70.5 strokes or 3.5 birdies over? Not really. I guess the 70.5 would be the better of the two, but I think the scoring average is going to be like 70.75. He's a below average player, so it's just, even that's kind of sketchy. The reason why it might make sense because he's playing some of his best golf lately, but I might stay away from that one myself. And then, yeah, the 3.5 birdie over 2. I just can't do it, man. Like, this course has some teeth this year. It's the extra long rough. It's the course being firmer and faster than what it has been the last couple of seasons. I don't think it's going to change up that much for tomorrow's round. So I might stay away from those, man. And like I said, I hate being a hater. I hate like saying like, oh, we got to fade these guys. But there's a reason why they do this too. And I've said this a couple times before, but the payouts for taking 2 fades are worse than taking 2 positive stance plays by design. Like, it's only 2.6x if we took the 2 overs on strokes. If these were 2 unders on strokes instead, they give you 2.7x. They do that because they know that most people out there want to play positive stance plays, and they give you that sort of a, what's the word for it? Feedback, right? They give you an even better value to go out there and do so, but then they screw you on the lines. They make the lines too optimistic, knowing that people are going to play a lot of positive stance plays, and they're able to leverage that in a lot of cases. And I feel like what we're seeing on here, like especially like some of these other guys at 4.5 that were like mid-tier players, is that's exactly what they're doing. This is a big week, by the way, for casual bettors, people that aren't into golf, to get into betting these props. And by the way, if you're somebody that's new watching, appreciate you tuning into the channel. I think you're at the right place for actually trying to get profitable bets in for tomorrow. But these books know that there's going to be a lot of newbies playing on a week like this, and they know that they're going to want to bet guys under strokes, overs on birdies, because that's the kind of sweat that you like seeing on your PGA Tour app. Not necessarily the one that's going to back up your bankroll the best, though. So I just want to throw that out there, as that's something that they do on these sites, and they kind of try and trap bettors as much as they can. And based on the pricing that I'm seeing so far, that's the kind of board that we're dealing with right now. Let's see. Looking for some more prop bets to give you guys in chats. See, so I think we caught up on all the prop questions. If I skipped over any, my bad, guys. Feel free to go ahead and throw those in chat, and I'll get back to them. You said, who do I take in Keith Mitchell versus Connors and then Decky versus Hovland matchups? So it depends on the odds, but I'm going to assume they're plus 100 apiece. Since you didn't give me the odds, I go Keith Mitchell because he has the better form and he hit the ball decently today. And then between Decky and Hovland, I would go Hovland because Decky was short game dependent, whereas Hovland was really good with the ball striking. So hopefully that gives you your answer, but it really does come down to the odds. That's always going to be the key determining factor on those. Yeah, I gave you you're looking at Keith versus Connors and then Decky versus Hovland. Yeah, I got you on those, bro. Should you take Scheffler outright after the 73? Probably not. I think you're going to get a much better number now than you would have otherwise, but he's really far behind the 8-ball. Maybe you save that bet for tomorrow morning if he's like -2 or -3 through the first couple holes, and he can still snag something that's decent. But I might hold off on that for at least a couple birdies at first. Got her up low flight is a make or break. Dude, he's really good in the wind. So I don't even think a surprise that he played well in some of the gusty conditions towards the end of the morning wave. He said, definitely seeing eye candy with Cameron Young and got her up to hit 7 or less fairways. Yeah, even Young too. I know we didn't mention that one on the fairway board, but he was one that I was kind of side-eyeing when we were going through it. He's a well below average fairway player, and the average was 7.5. So I'm totally with you on that one too. I think that the Goddard one's maybe slightly better just because of that push equity, but I'm totally behind you on that. Scotty's birdie prop is 5.5, and it's even money on both sides. You never want to fade world number one, but maybe it's tempting. I'm not fading them, but you're right. The value is on the under. Like it should probably be -130, -140 under if I was setting the line for myself, but I would never bet that. I have a rule: don't bet against Scotty Scheffler. We're sticking to that even after the 73. He said Goddard up shot -8 with only 7 fairways. So you'd have to think if he's going to regress a bit, probably not hitting as many fairways. I'm with you. He said Eurogolf was playing super easy early, starting to eye up some unders maybe. It's good to know. I didn't really see that today, though. If you take a look at the morning versus the afternoon, Bill, morning played -0.3, afternoon played +0.3. So you're right. It did play a little bit easier than the afternoon, but I don't think it was as drastic as maybe you think it was. So just a little bit of a heads up on that one, I say. He said the last prop you had your eye on, especially for the sake of multipliers, was the Scotty matchup with Cam Young. Yeah, you know the matchups aren't my thing, but they are good for multipliers. And you were looking at him versus Cam? Yeah, I couldn't bet that. The 0.5 just makes it so unplayable, bro. If they tie, then Cam Young's obviously going to win on that sort of thing. And after Scotty looked dreadful today, yeah. But if he had been like Scotty in form, like he was -7 after the first day, I could be a little bit more behind that, but not with the out of form, I'd say. So winds down for the morning wave tomorrow and played much easier than the afternoon. He said Stevens phenomenal ball striking, thoughts at 69.5. So yeah, I don't think the morning is going to be as easy because it wasn't as easy as like the conditions are the same. It's not the same conditions. There was literally 0 miles an hour wind for most of the morning today, and then it only kicked up for like the last 2 hours. So I do think the morning will be perhaps a little bit easier than the afternoon, mostly because of the receptiveness of the greens. But I don't think it's going to be anywhere near as drastic. But to get to your question about Sam Stevens, you were looking at the under at 69.5. I don't know. I wouldn't take him for like the under at 69.5. Like there's just like better players to do so at that sort of a number. Like if you're going to gain, or at least be asked to gain a stroke to a stroke and a half to the field to cover, I think you're going to have to play a 1.5 stroke gain round to shoot -2. Like I think the scoring average is going to be closer to even par than what you expect. If that's the case, I want elite tier guys at 69.5. I don't want somebody like a Sam Stevens that's an above average player. No diss to the above average player in a big PJ Tour event like this. He's not one of the top players in the damn world. So let's give him his flowers. But yeah, he's not Hideki. He's not Scotty Scheffler, obviously. And that's, I guess, the pushback I'd give you on that one. Would I ever consider unders on the 69.5 lines? Not really. Like maybe McNeely. So it's a good thing that you included a few people on there. Nikolai, absolutely not. He's just like a Sam Stevens in my book. Slightly above average player. No diss, but slightly above average player. Knapp, maybe slightly above that. I wouldn't call Knapp elite, though. McNeely is a borderline elite tier player in this field. if you're going to take somebody at that number, you do it with the elite tier guy like a McNeely. So yeah, I think it's a pretty nuanced take on that. It depends on the player you're talking about. And I'm sure the odds reflect that too. Like there's going to be some guys on DraftKings that are probably juiced towards the over at 69.5. Probably some guys that are juiced towards the under too. Looking at Finau under 4 birdies and then Cole for the over on 70 strokes. Yeah, I'm with you on some fades. The first fade question that we've gotten so far, that just shows you what these books do, right? They know that that's going to be the popular sentiment for most of the people out there. Tom Kim kind of stands out at 70 as well. If I think the average is going to be closer to like a 70.75, there could be some value on that. Let's see. Kevin Roy's at 70. I know you asked about Eric Cole. Eric Cole's got a little bit of a better shots gained floor than some of these other players. So I might prefer fading somebody like a Tom Kim, Kevin Roy, even just a little bit more. But I get the sentiment, and I'm not going to give you that much pushback on that. And who was the other one? It was an under on 4 birdies on Finau, right? So yeah, if I think the average is going to stay around 3.5 per round, maybe go slightly up to like 3.6 or so per round. If we can find an average to below average birdie maker at 4 birdies, then that would make a lot of sense. And I know you pointed out Tony Finau, and I actually don't think that that's the best bet on this. And I took an over on Tony Finau birdies last week, and here's why. These guys like Tony Finau, don't forget who they are. And I know why you were looking at it because of the last year's numbers, and I can see it, right? Number 148 on tour. Don't forget what he did in 2022. Tony Finau was what? Number 26 on tour in category that year. What was he the year before that? I believe he was like top 3 on tour or something crazy like that. Maybe it was the year before that. He was number 15 that year. What was he? 2024 is maybe the one I'm thinking about. Or maybe not. We'll see. Number 18 that year in birdie or better percentage. Normally, as you can see, though, a top 50 guy in the category, top 25 on years that he's playing well. I would rather, going back to the list, like take a Kevin Roy or a Seabez for the under at 4 that isn't really known for being an explosive birdie maker. Rather than somebody that can get hot like a Tony Finau at times. So I'm with you on the fades. The only shitty part about that is the payout. So with any of these fades values that you find, maybe you do want to pair them up with some of the live golf stuff that makes sense over there. I think that's something to look at. And you can also look at the Euro golf stuff as well. I think that there's fade value over here though. And they've actually started to bump some of this stuff up. So it seems like the books seem to agree with me. I think Nicholas Norgard Bowler was at 70 before, and now he's at 70.5 now. So that's at least slightly interesting there. He said, make an NBA prop tier. He said, you've been hitting on PRAs all week. We'd be rich with my slips. I wish I knew NBA enough to do so, man. But hey, if you want to throw anything by me on the NBA side, I got you. He said, pick 6 is finally up. Let me know if there's any props that you want to go through on that. Thoughts on Ewert as a flyer tomorrow who gained decent tee to green? Yeah, I noticed that. And I feel like he's done that a couple times already this year. Just to show the rest of the chat, though, the shots gained metrics that you're referring to, gained 2.3 strokes between the ball striking categories and then a little bit of a loser with the putter. It's a 7 out of 10 stat profile. So if you're looking to get to somebody at the very bottom end of the pricing that's going to be sub 2% owned, this is the kind of guy you do it on. I don't like picking names out of a hat. Course history could be a way to do it, but there's not a lot of course history guys at the bottom end of the 6K range. You could do it with POA putting, maybe high upside. The other way is with the ball striking stats, and he's one of the very few players down low that checks that box. So yeah, I like it. Is this golf course kind of hard? Yes. You always feel like it's a birdie fest, but if it's windy, it's not easy at all. You hit the nail on the head. It comes down to the wind. If it's a little bit breezy, then the conditions get harder. And something else to note with these lines is it's going to be the windiest in the middle of the day. So let's go back to TPC Scottsdale. Let's change this back to the HRRR. Middle of the day tomorrow is when it's looking the breeziest. If you want to take fades, late morning wave or early PM wave is probably the best place to go about it. Thanks, bud. I got you. You have a head-to-head between Goddard and Mackenzie Hughes for birdies. Who do I foresee having a better day? Goddard for sure. Even though Mackenzie is a little bit of a sleeper play this week, he's losing short game heading in, but gaining ball striking, which is very unlike him. He's normally a much better short game player than what he's done over the last 24 rounds. However, Goddard's just a much better player in a vacuum. So there's got to be some kind of odds on that. Right? There's no way you're getting that at even money, but if you are, then hammer Goddard up. But you'll have to let me know. So what day did we play Chad Ramey? Dude is a Showdown superstar. It's a good point. I wish I knew, man. If I knew ahead of time, I'd be telling you all so that we can make all the money on them. But the thing I want to just, I guess, point out with Ramey is that you're right. These volatile guys, this is like the quintessential high upside player. These guys that are good for like one round in a golf tournament are great for Showdown. And
Marco Penge is one of those guys for me tomorrow. Like Penge didn't really do that much today, but he's a really aggressive player, and hopefully he can go super low in our lineups. Let's go through some matchups that we're going to come back to the betting side here in a little bit with some prize pick stuff. But I want to point out some of the three balls that I was going through just to go on to the next section. So here are a couple that I was line shopping, and I'm going to have to see the odds that I can get on Hard Rock Bet. But if I can get similar and if I can get better odds, what you see here on the right side, I'm going to be entering at least a couple of these in my portfolio. And let's start up top with the Akshay versus Novak and Hall. Novak really struggled today, one of the worst rounds on the golf course. Hall was a little bit better, but Akshay had one of the best ball striking days out of anyone in the field. So for him to be at over that plus 200 mark, and by the way, plus 200 is like the big number on three balls. Reason for that is when you have three players to choose from, if everyone had the same exact implied odds, the fair odds would be plus 200. So if you can find somebody at better than that plus 200 odds that you think should have a fair chance to win this kind of a three ball, or, a 33% implied percentage like you're getting on these, then they should be worthy as being bets. And that's where I have an Akshay Bhatia. So that was one that kind of stuck out to me. I was also looking at Ricky at plus 175, so not quite all the way up to that plus 200, but going against a Siwoo who really struggled today, and Siwoo's the big favorite there, deservingly so though, but Minwoo who also lost ball striking. So you've got Fowler playing the best golf. This is a course, by the way, that he's absolutely murdered over his career. And I mean murdered in a good way. He's at top 25 finish after top 25 finish around TPC Scottsdale. Give me like plus 175 or better, and I'll bet that. You got McGreevy versus Hughes and Hisatune. McGreevy ball striking the living shit out of it. Hisatune and Hughes don't really scare me as much. So this is probably the one that I'm not for sure going to bet at plus 162, but you give me like plus 170 or more, I probably bet that one. We've also got a Nick Taylor versus Fox and Straka. Straka didn't have his fastball today. Neither did Nick Taylor. We actually bet them in the head-to-head, as you guys saw yesterday, and that tied, so we got our money back. But I'm going back to him on the three ball with the elite tier course history that he has, because Fox and Straka were kind of sketchy, and Taylor plays this golf course more than just about anyone on tour. He's from Scottsdale, plays out of here all the time out of the TPC setup, and he's got a win, a third place, and a 25th the last 3 years here. So enough said on that one. You give me plus 155 or more, and I'm 100% entering that one. Plus 150 or more, though, and I also likely get there. And then finally, Jordan Spieth at plus 340. And he's going against Scotty, and he's also going against Goddard. But plus 340 for Jordan Spieth, who loves this course. Jordan Spieth, by the way, kind of like a Ricky Fowler. Look at the course history. It is absurd. It is like a top 10 most years, if not like every other year for a Jordan Spieth. And you're telling me that he's got less than a 20% chance to end, or close to a 20% chance to win this sort of a matchup? Like, that's bullshit, especially with the course history. And then you add on top of it, Scotty looked like he was pouting, didn't look like he was really in the zone. You've got Goddard maybe due for some regression to the mean after being so short game dependent today. I mean, I hope he doesn't regress too much. But if Jordan Spieth shoots like a -5 rounds, he could sneak this kind of thing out at plus 340. So if you can give me that kind of number or better, I'll bet Jordan Spieth. But that one's going to be highly odds dependent. Like, I think he should be the third place guy in that group for sure. Like, don't get me wrong. Goddard and Scotty are studs. It's really hard to want to bet against those two players. But when the odds get long enough on a guy like Jordan that I absolutely love, that's the kind of thing that you'll see me betting at times. So a couple of three balls that make sense. We'll have to see what kind of odds are available on Hard Rock Bet. And also, we get head-to-heads on Hard Rock Bet, which are usually really good values to attack there too. So if you guys want to get all the exposure that I'm entering for round number 2, you guys can find that on my Patreon page. The Golf DFS tier is how you get access to the spreadsheet I was showing you with the projections before for all the underdog and prize picks props that I'm entering. Also, any three balls or head-to-heads that I'm entering on the sports books. The golf prop and betting tier is how you get access to that. And there's a link in the description of the video to get access to the Patreon page. Make sure to check it out if you guys haven't already. A very reasonable price tag to get access to all my analysis. Not only do you get every single bet that I'm entering and all the rhyme and reasoning behind it, that way you can learn how to find some value for yourselves and actually learn how to take on this really hard to predict sport that we have in golf. But also, you get the averages, you get all the different weather reports. I screenshot these from Windy so that you have them for all of your analysis. Highly recommend checking out if you guys haven't already. Let's see what we can do for another slip. We had the one live golf slip that we mixed in with PGA, but maybe we can get to a second one. It's got to be a fade, right? I mean, I've preached to you guys for the last how long about how fade values are probably it. I want to look at 69.5s, and I want to see if we can find a mid to or lower tier player. to fade against. Oh, you're saying, oh, I see what you're saying, Bill Bobby. My bad. You were saying the round 2 scoring average looks easy. Let's actually look at that. Because you could easily be onto something on that, obviously. Because the only thing better than having scoring averages from the day before is to have the ones from the live play. Unfortunately, we have to look at Data Golf, not my favorite website, as I'm associated with the much better site, Bet the Number, in my opinion. However, they do have the DP World Tour averages on here, so we'll look at them. Minus 1.24 so far. Round 1, you see it played slightly over par after they finished up play this afternoon. So let's see. The last few holes are pretty hard, at least on the backside. And yeah, 9, what? Did it play over par? Still played under par despite being a super long par 5. Yeah, I could see scoring trending a little bit easier, Bill. If you want to take some unders, I could get behind it. I thought overs might have been the play, but I think you're on to something there with those conditions. The only thing is these are very optimistic projections. Like, I think the one that really stands out to me is Camp Pio, having him at 70. If the scoring average is going to be, if I had to say based on like what we've seen so far, maybe it's like a 1.5 scoring average or a -1 when it's all said and done at the end of the day. If it's -1 to -1.5, then Camp Pio should probably be at like 70.5 or 71 strokes, because he's been an average to below average player on the DP World Tour. So that's why I get the sentiment. I do think the conditions will be easier, like you mentioned, but the board maybe isn't the best for it, is the only thing I would say. Kind of unfortunate, because I wanted to bet over there. Do I like Berger for the less than Hubbard on the matchup? Let's see, he's the main guy, right? And you're talking about the under towards Hubbard. So not really, no, because Berger is a slightly better birdie maker, at least if you account for the field strength and the actual birdies are better per round. But the other reason is, even if it was, let's say, 50-50 between those two, which I think the stats for like last year are pretty close on those two, the issue is that Daniel Berger is like an absolute murderer at this course. He's got top 10 after top 10 around TPC Scottsdale. Had the top 5 finish last year at this very golf tournament. Mark Hubbard doesn't have any of those top tier finishes. So maybe it's worthy of having that 0.5. I think it's pretty close to a coin flip, actually, on that one. And then you're looking at Scotty versus the Cam Young. Yeah, somebody else asked about that one before, too. I can't get to it after how Scotty played today. If he had better form, I could kind of see the argument for it, but Cam Young's a pretty good birdie maker himself. Thoughts on Morikawa's form to start the season? He looks legit bad. Yeah, he looks terrible. He's losing a bunch short game. Today, he flubbed a chip that I think everyone saw on X/Twitter, but he's still a stud. He'll figure it out at some point. He's just too talented of a guy not to get back into the winner's circle at some point. Yeah, you said you think that Tom Kim has lost too. It's unfortunate, man. I love Tom Kim. He's one of my guys, and he'll figure it out at some point. But yeah, like you said, even when he hits it good with his irons, he doesn't score. Exactly, because the birdie, the putter's not there. I will say, though, I heard him in an interview this week. He's working with new coaches now. So if we're going to see improvement, I have a lot more optimism that it happens now than what I had before. Like when he was just kind of doing his own thing, changing caddies every couple of weeks, he had no shot, but he's at least got half a chance now. Thoughts on Burns? His birdie line is 4.5, and the under is -120, and the over is -110. Oh, it's a tough one for me, man. Well, if the average is going to be like 3.5, the studs at 4.5 kind of make sense, but I would lean towards the under if the shots gained metrics weren't good. I wouldn't be taking the overs on a lot of studs at 4.5. It'd be unders for the most part, but I'd still have to line shop them, because like some studs at 4.5 make sense if they're playing good golf. But if you're telling me that like losing ball striking and only gaining in the short game categories, then I could get behind a fade on that. So let's actually look at Burns. All right, I'll do the deep dive for you here on the live stream. So he's been a pretty good ball striker. I'd probably stay away from it. I wouldn't fade him. Let's put it that way. Like, I think there's better fade candidates at 4.5, and the over is kind of sketchy to me. So the audio cut out for anyone else. It might just be you, but let me know in chat if it's not. And then Siwoo Kim versus McNeely at -110. That's a good one, man. Siwoo is the better player, and Siwoo is the better player lately, and I'll show you that with the shots gained metrics. However, this week so far, I mean, today in particular, Siwoo was absolute horseshit. So let's kind of go through this together, and I'll give you some thoughts. So last 24 rounds, let's compare the two. Over the last 24 rounds, Siwoo's the better player by just under a stroke per round, so pretty big discrepancy. But today, complete opposite. Today, it was a 5-stroke discrepancy towards Mav McNeely. So we've got to ask ourselves, do you want the guy who's playing better now, or do you want the guy that was playing better golf a long time ago? And I guess the answer to me is usually the guy that was playing better golf a long time ago, because it was only an 18-hole sample size of golf. We don't want to overreact to what we saw from today. So at minus 110, I'd be taking Siwoo Kim on that. And it's something where you just kind of got to plug your nose. It's going to be a nasty play, especially with him, with the bitch quit potential that we have from Siwoo Kim, giving up rather quickly. But at +2, he's only 3 or 4 shots off the likely cut line. He can still grind it out and make it to the weekend. So yeah, I think it's a good one. And I got to see if I can bet that myself. Is that one on a Hard Rock Bet? You'll have to let me know. He said thoughts on Seppi ended the round really well. He did, to my detriment. That's why I was gritting my teeth there. I wish Nick Taylor could have just edged him out, but I think that he's in a much better spot now than what he was before. Didn't play much in the fall, had some stuff going on. So rusty to start 2026 is pretty easy to imagine why that was the case. The shots gained profile today, I will default to that, was not that great. Let's get back to the right tab so I can show you that. But it was better in the second half, like you were saying. So overall, he was about a neutral ball striking. He was also just about a neutral in the short game categories. But the first half is where he lost 2 to 3 strokes to the field. And then the second half is where he gained those 3 strokes. So I'll give him a 6 out of 10 because of the positive momentum. He said Thompson at +170 over English and Harmon. I don't know if that's my favorite play. Just like the guy I took at like +170 something was a Ricky Fowler, who I feel a little bit better about as a player. Yeah, Thompson is being slept on. He's a little bit disrespected, in my opinion. English, he's an okay play. I like the putting stats for him on this type of grass. Harmon, too, maybe a short game regression candidate. I'd stay away from that one. I think that's pretty appropriately priced, but I get what you're doing. I understand the sentiment on that sort of a player. But let's do this. So 69.5. Let's find our favorite scrub to fade. And, we'll put scrub in quotes because these are all world-class players. I get it. Yeah. Let's see what we can do. Got Kirk. Colley's kind of standing out because his form has fallen off lately. Even a Grazerman's probably a little bit too of an optimistic projection. Rio's, he played well last week, so maybe we give him the benefit of the doubt. Same thing with that Haltong. If they've got good form, we could probably find some better players to avoid. Colley feels like the best value out of what I've seen on here so far. Maybe even a Steven Jaeger too. Jaeger's been in pretty shitty form for the last 6 or so months. I'm going to look at the course history on those two, and I guess we'll use that as the tiebreaker between which one that we take. But like Colley Jaeger should not be at the same projection as a Corey Connors or a McNeely. And for example, is McNeely at 69.5? So he's down at 69 flat. Like if he was 69.5, it would just make no sense for them to have the same sort of projection. But let me look at the course history on those two on the other tab. So let's go to Colley first. T21 last year, then 65th the year before that. And then who's the other one that we need to research? Short-term memory is shot this time of night. My apologies, guys. It's overloaded with all the golf that we've seen since 9 a.m. But Jaeger's got a missed cut of then a T62 from 4 years ago. So both pretty shitty form when it's all said and done. Let's look at the last 24 rounds on those two players. Jaeger is actually gaining strokes over that sample size. I was not expecting to see that. Now let's look at Colley. Colley's the other one. Colley's losing strokes over that sample size. So yeah, Colley's probably the better of the two fades, I'd have to say. I guess we can look at today's stats too, right? That's the other thing that we can go through. Let's do it on the matchup tab so that we can look at them side by side. Let's do Colley, Jaeger. Remembered it this time, thank God. So let's see. So they gained the same amount of strokes, which makes sense. But Jaeger was a little bit more short game dependent than Colley was. Honestly, the shots gained profiles are pretty close on these two. I don't think there's that much that we can really learn from it. And what did Colley do last week? I guess that's the other thing I want to look at. I know Jaeger had a good week. His first good week in forever, literally forever for Steven Jaeger. He missed the cut at the Amex, had an okay Sony Open. Let's look at Jaeger. Jaeger had the decent start at the Farmers. We know that. But what did he do before that? I'm kind of curious about. Missed cut, and then did okay at the Black Desert Championship. I think both of these make sense for fades. Like I might end up entering both of them at some point, but let's go with the Colley one for now. And then we're going to take it with a live golf prop. And I was looking at some of these other ones there before. And like I said, I didn't want to spoil them to get them taken off the board. And look at that. They took Munoz off the board already while we're still on the live stream. That just shows you how scared Prize Picks is of our action. Not a surprise though. They've been doing that all year. But these guys at 4, I mentioned that there would still be some value on some of those players. We can make that work too. And I also want to line shop somebody by the name of Victor Perez, because Victor Perez played on the PGA Tour, much harder tour to gain on compared to Live. Even though I like some of the Live guys, it's a joke compared to the level of tour on the PGA. Anyone that tells you otherwise is a complete bot. But Victor Perez was a little bit above average on the PGA Tour last year at making birdies. So if we think the average is going to be close to like 4 birdies again, or at least like 3.5, then he would probably make sense for the over. Let's look at some of the Live Golf guys, the ones that we have the stats from last year. There's Bryson, there's Carlos Ortiz. I don't think we can get Bryson or Rahm at the 4 birdie mark, but I think we can get Joaquin there. Yeah, Joaquin's at that exact 4 birdie mark. So maybe he's that combination that we mix in on this side of things. I don't want to discount the strokes board. I know that I did say that the birdie or better board might have been a little bit easier to attack, but there were some guys on the strokes board that I thought really made sense as well. And to go back to the scoring average on Live, I know the birdie average is the primary one. I think it'll be at least a -1.5 scoring average, maybe -1 at the very worst is what I'd say. And then -1.5, probably the more accurate scoring average out of those two. If it's a -1 scoring average, also keep in mind the outliers that are heavily throwing these off. There are some legit guys at 71 strokes here that we could take for an under 2. So in fact, let me bring up, like I said, this is the rival sites. I don't like using them unless I absolutely have to, but this is a spot where I do want to look at this. We go to Live Golf over the last 50 measured rounds. Part of the reason I really liked Munoz is you can see he's number 5 in shots gained per round, but we got Puig and then Joaquin Niemann. That would make sense. Let's see what Puig's at. Is Puig 69.5? Yeah, wow. They've got him at a very positive projection there. Maybe we can go with Joaquin or Carlos Ortiz at 70, but who else is at the top end of this list? You've got McKibben. Let's see where he's at. There's Victor Perez. And by the way, Victor Perez, he gained strokes in PGA Tour fields. So on the Live Tour, you think it would have to be a little bit easier. At least most people would think that. Got Peters, slightly above average player. Elvis Smiley, a gainer from the DP World Tour. He's a pretty good player too. Let's see what we can get. What was Dietrich at? Is Dietrich at 70? Because if so, that sucks. I wish it would be at like 71. Then I'd be able to hammer that sort of an under. I didn't see Dietrich on there. I guess he didn't have a line, and that's why we didn't see it on there before. Let's confirm that. So he's at 70.5. I'm just blind, I suppose. So that's about where I have the average for tomorrow. So just have a slightly above average day. It's mighty fine tempting. Do we go with the safer birdie line on a Joaquin, or do we go for broke with the strokes lines? I'm kind of torn on it, to be honest with you. Just doing my due diligence just through the rest of these lines on here to see if there's anything else that really makes sense. To go back to the Victor Perez one, because that was one that I was kind of thinking about getting to. I think the average is going to be closer to 70.5. That means he could have a slightly worse than average day and still push that line. That might be worth mixing in. Just because, and you still have the push equity in Joaquin too, obviously, as the number 2 birdie maker. Actually, let's just do that. Let's not overthink it. Let's just go with our first lean on that. The first instinct, using your intuition is obviously something that I think is a good thing anyways. In a lot of cases, your unconscious mind can do a lot of good things for itself as well. Sometimes it's trying to save you with some of those gut instincts. Let's go with those two as the second slip that we're going to enter in. What we're doing, by the way, by taking PGA and Live together is we're getting full 3x payout on these because, like I said, with the PGA board, I think it's just too optimistic in a lot of different cases here. So to avoid the shitty payouts, only the 2.6x that you get for 2 fades, that's why we're mixing up the 2 different sites together. And I was going to enter Live Golf stuff anyways. I watched both tours, and I do see a little bit of an edge on that side with the conditions being so easy. So why not go out there and structure it in that format? But if you guys want to see every single slip that I'm entering for tomorrow, you guys can find that on the Patreon page. Prop and betting tiers, how you guys get all the underdog and prize pick stuff. Golf DFS tiers, how you get the other stuff from Showdown before. But we're at the 2-hour mark. I'm going to go ahead and cut off the live stream there to get some sleep and get ready for all the action there tomorrow. But best of luck with everything that you guys are entering. I hope to see you guys at the top end of those leaderboards. Check out the Patreon for everything else that I'm going with for tomorrow. And let's have ourselves a day.